Chapter 531. Crop Dust. Right after the uproar Michael caused due to his insane spending, the auction continued on at a normal pace. More items were shown, but not a lot of them got the attention of the big companies. At this point, none of the major factions had even submitted a bid yet. Even for important and rare items like mithril relics or cultivation pills, they never knocked on the tinted glass walls. But of course, everyone knew that major factions were on a completely different level than most companies. Rare items may be just common for them. Okay, our next item up for bid is something most, if not all, had yet to see, Barnaby said as he commanded a platform to rise up from the stage. The item shown this time around was encased in a black resin box the size of a pencil case. This, ladies and gentlemen, is something that is mythical in nature. They came from creatures rarely seen from our eyes, but always ever present where emotions run high. Barnaby approached the black box and began to open it. Meanwhile, as Michael heard his description for the item, he couldn't help but feel that it was familiar. It's not about her, is it? I present to you a vial of pixie dust, Barnaby announced proudly. This pixie dust will allow you to attract the attention of the very elusive fairies. If you ever want to feel their presence close, then you need this item. Michael immediately looked back at his crew, who were still playing games to pass the time. Uno. I won, Vivy exclaimed, buzzing around and rubbing her win in everyone's face. The Dragonborns shook their heads. They weren't even playing Uno anymore. Michael signaled for Vivy's attention and called her over. The self-proclaimed Pixie Queen fluttered her wings and obediently landed on Michael's palms. What is it, Mr. Reborn? He pointed at the stage, towards Barnaby, who was presenting the vial containing golden dust that floated around and never settled on the bottom. Oh, that's pixie dust, Vivy said nonchalantly. You don't care that they're auctioning it off? Michael asked. He thought that she would be a little mad since the fairies considered their pixie dust as their own body. Meh, Vivy shrugged. Michael, do you care about your own waste? Michael was speechless. For him, her comparison didn't make any sense. Pixie dust had the magical ability to make anything as light as a feather. It certainly couldn't be compared to human waste. Okay, maybe back then, I would have been a lot more conservative about our pixie dust. After all, we need sustenance to keep producing it. But now that we have your roller coaster, we can have as many emotions as we want. We don't have to worry about not having enough to produce pixie dust. Now he understood why Vivy made that comparison. Pixie dust really was just the waste of a fairy. Wait, is that why they call it crop dusting? Michael shook his head of all silly thoughts and looked back at the auction. He noticed that not a lot of companies were even bidding for it. 100,000 coins. Do I hear 110? Barnaby appealed, trying to get the companies to bid more. This was perhaps one of the lowest bids that happened in the auction, which wasn't that surprising given that it was small in quantity. Not enough to even make a boulder weightless. The only ones who were bidding were collectors who simply wanted the pixie dust as their decoration. 123,000 coins. Going once, going twice. And just as Barnaby was about to declare the final bidding, a knock resounded from one of the top VIP suites in the entire auction. Barnaby's eyes widened. He became flustered. This time, it wasn't because the bid amount was too high. It was because he wasn't expecting them to bid. 150,000 coins. From the mermen of Atlantis, Barnaby shouted, his voice still having a hint of disbelief. As soon as he said that, the whole auction was once again set ablaze with discussions and murmurings. Just hearing about their name awed some of the people watching from the crowd. The infamous mermen, the creations of the Ocean King, were here, and for the first time tonight, they had made their presence felt through this bid. The amount wasn't too big, but the fact that they bid at all was a point of surprise for a lot of people. Some people didn't even think that the mermen would make a bid, let alone bid for a relatively worthless item. They bid on this? It's just pixie dust. They didn't want the dwarven armor or the mithril relic. Why would they want pixie dust? And because of their participation, the knocks just kept coming in. Knock, knock, knock. Companies began submitting their bids for the pixie dust. Just the fact that the mermen considered it as something worthwhile meant that they considered it worthwhile as well. It wasn't long before the bids went up as high as 500,000 gold coins, which was 5 times its original value. Do I hear 510? Does anybody want to bid higher than that? Barnaby asked. There was another knock, and this bid once again came from Merman's VIP suite. 1 million gold coins. The mermen take the lead, Barnaby exclaimed. This time, the other companies truly started to take this seriously. At first, they thought that the mermen simply wanted the pixie dust for vanity's sake. But the fact that they were willing to offer 1 million meant that they were more than desperate to buy this for themselves. This got a lot of companies thinking. Was there something that they missed about the pixie dust? Even Michael started to doubt Vivy. Are you sure it has no other properties other than making things levitate? Why would the mermen want pixie dust? Vivy was clueless as well. I don't know. Don't ask me. I just know that pixie dust definitely isn't worth 1 million. Michael seriously started to wonder if Vivy truly was the pixie queen or not. How could she not know the worth of her own pixie dust? Or wait, maybe it's not the pixie dust they want. Chat JK4. Can you recall Barnaby's exact words when he described the item? Understood. Preparing audio file now. I present to you a vial of pixie dust. This pixie dust will allow you to attract the attention of the very elusive fairies. If you ever want to feel their presence close, then you need this item. Michael listened to the tape and realized something. Maybe the mermen were trying to find the fairies, and it seemed that he wasn't the only one who noticed that. On the second level of the private rooms, the Rising Six all collectively decided to speak amongst each other and coordinate. One of the features in Barnaby's auction private rooms was that companies could choose to speak to other companies through connecting their rooms via pocket dimensions. Bo, Reena, and the other Rising Six stepped into their room's pocket dimension and arrived in a dimly lit room with a circular table in the middle. They all sat down on their respective seats and faced each other equally. Chapter 532. Rising Six Meeting. The Rising Six, considered to be the most talented younger generation from Metropolis, for the first time in a while, gathered in a single room to discuss the current situation of the auction. Now, despite the 6 of them sitting in a circle, all attention was directed at the person who planned this discussion in the first place. Beauregard. Now, you all probably know why I gathered you here, Bo said, leaning on the table with both her hands clasped together. I want to discuss the pixie dust, specifically why the mermen want it in the first place. A man wearing a cowboy hat lined with crocodile skin leaned forward, letting half of his face be illuminated by the magic light above. He was chewing on a single straw of wheat with an amused smile on his face. I don't understand why y'all even having this discussion. They just want the pixie dust because they can afford it, he said. Reena scoffed. Reptar, it's not that simple. Would your crocodile leather company want to spend 1 million coins purely for vanity? The man was called Reptar, and he was the rising star for the crocodile leather company, considered to be the 3rd best among this group. I'm sure that it has something to do with the fairies. A man with long bangs covering his eyes spoke meekly. Fim's right, Bo remarked. Despite looking shy and docile, one must not underestimate this boy named Fim. After all, he was considered the 2nd best rising star under only Bo herself. He represented the company Angelic Crafts, which was just as successful as the Pyramidic Cuisine. I don't know much about mermen, but I know that they have little in common with landlocked creatures. What would they even want with the fairies? Another young man, wearing a matching khaki shirt and shorts, spoke his opinion on the matter. He looked like he would fit right into a nature documentary. The man was called Erlo's, and he was the 4th-ranked rising star, coming from the Alligator Company, meaning that he was the rival of Reptar and the Crocodile Leather Company. Do we even have to know why they want it? This question came from Tenzing, who was the buffest out of all of the Rising Six. He was ranked 5th and came from the Mountain Movers Company. Right you are, Tenzing. We don't need to know why the mermen want the pixie dust, Bo affirmed. It's important that we know they want it, meaning that we can take advantage of it. Reena immediately figured out what she was trying to say. You want to get the pixie dust for them, and use it to build a relationship with the merman. Bo pointed at her. Yup. If we can have a business relationship with the merman, our companies can finally push through that final hurdle and be considered among the major factions. This certainly put all the rising stars silent for a moment. They all yearned for that moment, and they would do anything they can to achieve it. If that's so, then why not just do it yourself? Reena asked Bo. I agree with Spice Girl here, said Reptar. I want that pixie dust for myself, which makes this meeting entirely useless from the start. Bo shook her head. I'm very sure that we are not the only ones who have this kind of thinking. The legacies of the major factions are probably having a meeting of their own as we speak. Do you think they'll let go of this opportunity to have a business with the merman? If I was in their position, I would jump at the chance, especially if I had the resources to back it up. So, if you want to compete with Alaric or the others by yourself, then feel free to do so. Bo's reminder was a wake-up call to the Rising Six. They might be considered one of the top companies in Metropolis, but in comparison to the major factions, they could still be considered as a novice or a beginner. In a one-on-one fight, they would be crushed like an ant. You've made your point, said Tenzing. I'm assuming that you have a solution since you've gathered us all here. Bo smiled. That's right. Individually, we will get completely outbid by the major factions in every way. But if we pool our resources together, then we can have a chance at winning the bid. This was a very bold move, one that surprised all the other Rising Six. After all, even though they were all friendly towards each other, they were still very much competitive against each other. They were just like the legacies in this regard. But compared to them, the Rising Six were more competitive rather than friendly. After all, they each had a goal to surpass one another and reach the major factions. Working together like this would definitely be out of the norm. You do know that even if we pool our resources together, there is still a chance that the major factions can outbid us, Fim muttered out with a small voice. That was how large the gap was between major and minor factions. Don't worry, eased Bo. They definitely won't use up all of their resources to get this pixie dust. They're waiting for the vehicle and the Sioux. If they use up their resources now, they'll only end up short once those big items come up on the auction. Hearing her reasoning led all the other Rising Six to seriously consider her offer. If they were going to fight against the major factions, then this was the only way that they could defeat them in bidding. Does everyone agree? Bo asked, raising her hand. One by one, they raised their hands until there was just one holdout among them. If we need resources, then why don't we just ask that company to join us? Erlo said, fixing his khaki shirt. You know the one I'm talking about, Bo. He was pertaining to none other than the Reborn company, who had shown their wealth in the most extravagant way possible, by beating the pyramidic cuisine so badly that they couldn't even bid anymore. No one had ever done that against Bo, so it definitely left a lasting impression on them. Yeah. Why didn't you ask them to participate in this meeting? Tenzing asked. We won't need their manpower. Ours is enough. But we will need their money. I'm sure that they're wealthy enough to be on our level. Or maybe you're still a little salty after losing against them in the bid. That's why you didn't invite them here, Reptar teased. Bo smiled, almost chuckling. That's where you're wrong. I'm very much interested in meeting with the Reborn company. I'm curious to see who was able to stand on the same plane as me and win. However, I couldn't find them anywhere at all. They weren't answering any of my intentions. I tried contacting every single private suite in the auction, but none of them responded as the Reborn company. Of course, she didn't know that she was looking in the completely wrong direction. If she contacted the VIP room above hers, she would have met with Michael. Chapter 533. Bidding for the Merman. Meanwhile, back in the auction, Barnaby raised the vial of pixie dust in the air and announced its new bid. 1 million gold coins. Will anyone try and beat the merman's bid? Knock. That knock came directly from one of the VIP suites in the auction, meaning that they were part of the major faction. The Gilder & Company wishes to bid 1.5 million gold coins, Barnaby announced. This made a lot of companies seriously consider bidding for the pixie dust. If even one of the major factions thought that there was something worthwhile with the pixie dust, then there must be truly something good there. This is Alaric's first bid. No one's going to come close in bidding against him. I don't know. If the Magic Tower or the royal family tries to fight him on this, then I think he'll lose against them. Damn. I thought that the pixie dust was just a worthless item. I was even contemplating on buying it for my kids as a toy. Now that the major factions have shown their interest, this item is now out of our league. Many companies thought that no other organization would fight Alaric on this one. But it was in that moment that 6 knocks echoed out into the auction simultaneously, making Barnaby confused. It wasn't until one of his employees came up to him on the stage and whispered something in his ear did he finally understand what was happening. Folks, looks like we have another unprecedented bid on our hands. The Rising Six have declared their intention to bid on the pixie dust for 3 million gold coins. Everyone gasped at the news. They expected the Rising Six to compete against each other for the bid, but they didn't expect them to work together. I didn't even know that they could do that. They must be really desperate to get it. Of course, it's the mermen. If the Rising Six get this chance, then they'll have a chance in going up in rankings. But if the major factions get this, then they'll only widen the gap even more. Knock! Things are heating up. The Quench Company submitted their bid with 5 million gold coins. It wasn't long after that another knock came, this time again coming from the VIP room. 10 million gold coins. Coming from Sinclair's Elixir. The Gilderan Company makes a counter with 20 million. The Magic Tower enters the fray with 30. Once the major factions showed up, the numbers just kept going higher and higher with seemingly no limits at all. It was at this point that no other company could even try to enter the bid. They would have to sell everything they owned and bankrupt themselves if they wanted to just match the current bid. And it didn't even seem like the bid would just stop there. Alaric bids 40 million. Does anybody want to fight that? Barnaby asked with a huge smile on his face. This unexpected windfall was very fortunate for him. Another 6 simultaneous knocks came from the second floor. The Rising Six uses their combined resources to offer 50 million. Barnaby screamed. This time, the crowd were amazed that the Rising Six could even keep up with the major factions. As expected of them, only they can stand a chance against those behemoths. It makes sense. They're more desperate, more hungry to get the item. Let's go Rising Six. Meanwhile, while all of this was going down, Michael suddenly felt something knocking from the wall to his left. He turned around and saw that a portal appeared from the solid stone wall, leading to a completely new pocket dimension. Using his supreme skill, he tried to see through the portal and see who or what was inside it. His eyes widened as he saw a familiar face. He walked towards the portal and walked through the other side just as easily as he would walk through a door. The pocket dimension was a small enclosed room lit up with a magic mode of light. There was only a simple wooden table in the middle with 2 cups of hot tea ready to drink, and 2 chairs on opposite sides. The chair opposite him was already occupied by an old yet spry woman with gray hair. Duchess, I didn't think that we could communicate with other bidders, he greeted her. The Duchess laughed and gestured for Michael to sit in his chair. Barnaby's auction allows bidders to request a pocket dimension to communicate with others. Sit, she replied. Michael sat down and met with the Duchess face to face. I'm glad you made it to the auction. I was worried that the sudden change in schedule would hinder you from entering. I'm glad I warned you beforehand, she said, sipping her tea. You let Fudge eavesdrop, he realized. Yes, that little slime of yours is very strange but oddly charming. I see him just jumping around and teaching my grandchildren the art of becoming a ninja. The Duchess cackled. Thanks for warning me. I was able to prepare more soda because of that. The Duchess warmly smiled. Of course, I am rooting for you, you know? That's actually why I'm here talking to you right now. I'm here to give you advice. He had a feeling he knew what she was talking about. After all, even in this pocket dimension, he could hear Barnaby's voice echoing through the walls as the price of the pixie dust went up and up. Is it about the mermen? He asked her straight. That's right. Before I met you, do you remember that I was out of Metropolis? Well, I was out there talking with the mermen, And one of the things they discussed to me is their desire to meet and speak with the Pixie Queen and the fairies. This confirmed his guess. Do they want to meet the Pixie Queen or just the fairies? They want the fairies themselves. They say that they are the key to what they're looking for here in the royal continent. They hope to find the Pixie Queen and strike a mutually advantageous deal with her, she revealed. Michael sipped his tea while in deep thought. He didn't know enough about the mermen to guess their intentions. If he wanted to know, then he'd most likely have to speak with them first. You should already know how important the mermen are in the royal continent. He shook his head. Why are they important? Is it just because Sue comes from their home place? Yes, that is one part of that. But the most important reason is that the merman's currency is one of the most valuable things in this world. It's called the sand dollar, and you can use them to pay for a lot of things that normally can't be paid for with money. For example, God-forged pieces and spirit of olds. With the right amount of sand dollars, you can have as much as you like. This made Michael sit up straight. Those were the two things he desperately needed right now. If the Duchess wanted him fired up, then she definitely succeeded. Chapter 534. Sand Dollar. Do you understand now why even the major factions are interested in the pixie dust? They think that it's what will lead them to get the precious sand dollars from the mermen. If they purchase the pixie dust, then the mermen will have no choice but to speak with them, therefore giving them the opportunity for a sand dollar exchange. Michael still couldn't get over the purchasing of Sue and God-forged pieces. So, the mermen use sand dollars as their type of currency. And with sand dollars one can buy God-forged pieces and Sue? I thought that the mermen only had Sue, but they also have God-forged pieces. Not exactly. You're right that they are the only source of Sue in the entire world. However, God-forged pieces are found everywhere as long as you look hard enough. Organizations and companies can buy God-forged pieces as long as they have enough gold coins. But they can't buy all the Sue they want even if they had all the money in the world. That's because Sue can only be bought with sand dollars. So, what other people do is that they sell off their extra God-forged pieces for sand dollars, which they will use to buy Sue. It still didn't make sense to Michael why people had to go through all that trouble. Why can't people just buy sand dollars from the mermen with our money? Or better yet, just buy Sue for gold coins. The Duchess showed Michael the cup of tea they were drinking. If I were to sell this tea to a thirsty person, they'll give me gold coins because they want to drink it. But if I were to sell this to a rock, they won't buy it because it's not useful to them. Mermen live a completely different life from humans and demi-humans. For them, gold coins are just as useless as the rocks on our ground. How would you feel if people paid you rocks in exchange for your automobiles? This explanation from the Duchess gave him some more clarity he needed. Currency was only useful if the majority of the people agreed that it was useful. Anyway, this is a chance for you to get a sand dollar for yourself. You should cooperate with the Rising Six and try to outbid the major factions with your money. You'll need cooperation if you want to outbid the big leagues, the Duchess advised. Of course, if it was any other circumstance, Michael wouldn't have hesitated. But of course, knowing who he had back in his VIP suite, doing so would be a fruitless endeavor. There's no need, he told the Duchess. Hearing this, the Duchess couldn't help but laugh to herself. Oh, I see what you're getting at. You want to bid for the pixie dust yourself. Ha ha ha. I knew you were rich, but I just didn't know how much. He waved his hand. No, nothing like that. I just mean that I don't need the pixie dust. I already have them in droves. What? The Duchess asked, surprised. And before she could ask for more elaboration, Michael whistled with his hands and called for Vivy to come through the portal and into the pocket dimension. A few seconds later, a bubbly fairy the size of a finger buzzed through the portal and landed directly in his shoulder. Vivy sat on his clavicle, swinging her feet and humming a catchy tune. Watcha want, Mr. Reborn? The Duchess' eyes went wide seeing this legendary demi-human in the flesh. That small stature, those fluttery wings, that golden ethereal glow that surrounded her, and most of all, the golden dust that was coming off of her with every movement that she made. There was no mistaking it. That was a fairy. I can't. That's a fairy, the Duchess exclaimed, unable to hide her shock. Even in all her years of living, she had never seen or felt the presence of a fairy even once. She was also sure that no one had ever seen them at all. They were famous for always playing tricks and hiding away from prying eyes. Yet somehow Michael had one on his shoulders. Not only that, but they seemed extremely familiar with each other as well, as if they were friends. Duchess, meet Vivy. Vivy, meet the Duchess. Vivy fluttered her wings and buzzed around the Duchess' face, observing her looks and expression. Yeah, she's shocked all right. Mind if I take a bite? Michael immediately grabbed her and yanked her away from the Duchess. That's the Duchess, you know? The whole of Metropolis will hunt you down if something were to happen to her. He warned her. All right, Mr. Reborn. I'll just wait till we get back to the roller coaster. At this point, the Duchess had been completely speechless and flustered for the first time in 40 years. She didn't know what to say. Oh, Vivy, the Duchess tells me that the merman wants to see you and the fairies. Any idea why? Vivy tilted her head, trying to pass through her thoughts of playing Uno and into her memory center. She seemed on the verge of remembering something, but nothing would come up. I don't know, Sorry, Vivy said. Michael sighed. Ugh, fine. I'll just ask your mother about it next time I see her. You know, sometimes I think that she should be the Pixie Queen instead of you. It was at this moment that the Duchess almost had a heart attack. Queen. Immediately, one of the Duchess' attendants, presumably her doctor, came rushing inside the pocket dimension and checked in on her well-being. He felt her pulse and listened to her heartbeat. She's healthy, the man realized, confused. She's just shocked. My bad. Michael scratched his head awkwardly. After a minute of total silence, the Duchess finally regained her senses and took a big breath. Michael, you know the Pixie Queen? You're friends with her. He nodded. Yeah, we kinda have an agreement going on. I feed her and the fairies emotions, and in exchange, they work for me. The Duchess could only look at Michael as if he was an alien. He was able to make the very elusive fairies into being his workers. No one had ever even seen a fairy before, much less have them actively be a part of an organization or company. Sigh. We'll have to talk more about this fairy thing later, the Duchess said, massaging her head. Headaches seemed to be a common theme around the people interacting with Michael. All right, sure. I also want to know more about the mermen and the $100 thing. I'll try and introduce you to them. They usually don't accept guests because they're so hard to please. But once I tell them about your relationship with the fairies, then I think that they'll make an exception, the Duchess promised. She then walked back to her VIP suite being guided by her attendant. He looked back at her and felt a little bit sorry for making her experience that shock. He would have told her about his agreement with the dwarves too, but he didn't want her to be in an even worse state than she already was. And maybe next time. He returned to his VIP suite and watched the auction unfold. Chapter 535. Bidding Tome. The Rising Six have won the auction for the pixie dust. With such a high price, even the major factions were forced to back off. If they tried to fight, then they'd risk losing the auction for the automobile and the 15 drops of sue. And because they bid on it as a group, and that they already had a pre-existing agreement between them to share the contents, they won the item even if they hadn't played the game yet. This led a lot of people to become even more amazed by the Rising Six. Wow! They won against the major factions. Who would have thought? Only they can do that. Man, I wish our company was in the Rising Six. Keep dreaming, man. If the gap between the major factions and the Rising Six is big, then the gap between normal companies and the Rising Six is even bigger. They're called the best talent of the younger generation for a reason. Eventually, Barnaby moved on to the next item up for bid. Now for this item, I must admit that even I do not know its true value. For it is something that cannot be deciphered by me or even any other cryptologist in Metropolis. As Barnaby announced its description, a platform slowly levitated from the center of the stage, revealing the cloaked item underneath it. I have searched high and low to see if they could read or understand its contents, but to no avail. If you want to try your luck in deciphering its contents, then bid in this item you must. But just a warning, Ladies and gentlemen, I have asked the Tower Master to decipher it, but even he and all the other senior wizards couldn't crack it. If you buy this and you can't break it, then we are not liable for it. Barnaby walked over to the item and ripped away its red coat, revealing it to be an ancient red tome whose condition was only slightly better than completely destroyed. The original title of the book had been stripped away by time and degradation. Its pages were yellowed and on the brink of disintegration. It looked like it would turn to dust the moment that someone flipped the page. Still, despite its condition, there were still a lot of parts in the book that were readable, although it wouldn't exactly be considered readable if one couldn't read it in the first place. After all, the letterings were something that no one had ever seen before, even Michael. It seemed to shift and change with each glance, making it hard to decipher even if you had 1,000 years of trial and error. Purchase at your own risk, Barnaby warned. Of course, all of his warnings only served to make the item even more valuable than before. People loved a good challenge, and the fact that no one had yet to decipher it meant that no one had yet to get its potential treasure. Even if it led to no treasure at all, the mere possibility that it could led a lot of companies to start bidding in droves. Starting at 100,000. I hear 110, 110, 120. Do I hear 120, 120, 150,000 gold coins? As everyone was bidding on the tome, Michael suddenly saw a notification in his vision. Progress to next update, 42.03%. ChatJK almost never gave this kind of notification unprompted, so Michael knew what it was trying to say. Do you want that tome, ChatJK? It would be beneficial to the progress of the system update if you were to obtain more unorthodox data that is not readily available to most humans. The progress for the system update had stalled for a really long time because Michael found it hard to find spells and knowledge that he didn't already know. It had stalled to the point that he was sure that if he were to touch a magic library from a magic tower, then it wouldn't even move up to 10%. You do have a point. No one has ever deciphered that book before, so maybe you'll get a lot of information from it. Given, of course, that you are able to decode it. He didn't know why, but he swore he could feel ChatJK scoffing. Anyways, he decided to knock on the tinted glass walls to give his own bid. Wow! The Reborn company bids 1 million gold coins. As soon as that name was mentioned, everyone turned their attention towards the auction. Many companies weren't interested in the tome, but they were interested in the mysterious Reborn company, who seemed to have funds equal to that of the Rising Six. A few seconds later, someone bid against him for 1.1 million. Since the price had gone up, he had fewer competitors. But there were still some who could afford a few million for the tome. Since he wasn't going against any of the Rising Six or the major factions, Michael just decided to finish the bidding right then and there. Knock. 10 million. The Reborn company offers 10 million for the mysterious tome. Going once? Going twice? Declared. The Reborn company was once again the subject of conversation. After all, no one was crazy or rich enough to offer so much money for relatively mundane items. Everyone was sure that the tome was worth only 3 million at most, meaning that the Reborn company was severely overbidding. But knowing what they did the previous time, many people knew that the Reborn company was only doing this so that they would win the item without having to play the game. Wow! It must be so good to have so much money. Yeah, I get it. If I were them, I would totally do the same. Does anybody know what kind of business they own? How are they still unknown if their business is successful enough to get that kind of money? Barnaby didn't have to count down anymore. No one was going to bid higher than that. Sold. The Reborn company wins the mysterious tome for $10 million. Are you happy now, ChatJK? This software does not allow me to have emotions. However, obtaining the tome can be considered as a joyous occasion. Man, what a tsundere. What was that? Nothing. Thankfully for Michael, everyone's attention was soon brought on towards the stage, as the sound of drums beating echoed throughout the walls. Not only that, but wizards were casting light spells and illusion spells to entertain the crowd. He could tell that something real special was about to come. We have finally reached this stage, Barnaby exclaimed. drums beating in the background. I am glad to announce that we are going to be auctioning off 5 whole drops of the spirit of old. The crowd went wild, shouting and cheering with excitement. This was one of the moments they'd been waiting for. This was the moment where all of the strongest companies competed against each other to see who would win the ultimate prize. Michael immediately put his hand on the tinted glass. He was ready to fight for it. Chapter 536. 5 drops bidding. Everyone's eyes were glued at the platform that slowly levitated from the ground. Barnaby took off the red veil concealing the item, revealing a small vial the size of a small finger. Its contents were barely visible and made it seem like it was empty. After all, there were only 5 drops of Su contained inside it. But of course, just those 5 drops were enough to make the entire territory of Metropolis crazy. Even the major factions looked on at the vial with desire in their minds. And if they were allowed, they would have used their enormous resources to take it for themselves. The fact that they could buy it through gold coins and not sand dollars was enough reason to bid an extravagant amount of money for it. Barnaby spread his arms wide and panned his vision through the 6 layers of private suites in the auction. I believe in giving people a chance. I know that the major factions want this vial for themselves, but I know that this would lead our other companies unable to catch up. That is why I am limiting the bidding to only those who are in the minor factions and below. The major factions are disqualified from entering. This made a lot of people happy. The less than successful companies who wanted Su but knew that they wouldn't have the resources to fight a heavy auction battle against the major factions were immediately grateful for Barnaby's announcement. Finally, they had a chance at getting those few drops of Su. Of course, no one was more thankful than the Rising Six. Without the major factions, they had the best chance at getting those drops. 1, 2, 3. Bid start. As soon as Barnaby finished his sentence, knocks continued to ring throughout the auction arena. The original bid of 10,000 quickly turned into 1 million just from a few seconds of knocking. 2 mil. 2 mil. Oh, we got 3 million now. Nope. 5 million. Come on. Come on. Keep incoming. 7 million. For about 90% of all the companies in this auction, this few drops of Su was the last thing that they could realistically get for the night. After all, the only things that were left in the auction were the automobiles and the other 15 drops of Su. For sure, those items would get swept up by the major factions. Because of this, most companies decided to go all out and try to bid for the Su drops for as much as they could afford. 10 million. We got 11 million. Barnaby was starting to feel tired as he continued to announce the bids, so he decided to increase the minimum bidding necessary. I will now only accept biddings with 5 million increments, Barnaby shouted. But despite this, the frequency of knocks didn't lower at all. People kept bidding and bidding that there was practically no difference at all. Wow! 50 million bid from the mountain movers. Some groans echoed through the crowd. The Rising Six has finally shown themselves. I can't keep up anymore. I didn't think they'd increase it so high so fast. At this point, about 50% of all the companies were forced to drop out. They'd have to dip into their savings if they wanted to compete, and it looked like the price had no indication of stopping its growth. 55 million. Offered by the Spice Vice, Barnaby announced. Oh, another bid by the Crocodile Leather Company. 60 million. Do I hear 70? Do I hear 70? 70 offered by the Pyramidic Cuisine. Despite their cooperation to obtain the Pixie dust last time, it looked like the Rising Six were back at it again as competitors and rivals. They kept bidding back and forth, increasing the price so much that only 20 companies were able to compete. As expected, they're the only ones that can compete for this Su. I should have known. They're the most desperate to get it. Yeah, they'd be able to increase their ranking if they do. Maybe we'll even see a revised ranking of the Rising Six after this auction. The price of the Su had now reached a staggering 100 million gold coins. The bidding had finally come to a point where the knocking finally took a break. Barnaby could finally breathe properly now that there were a few seconds between bids. 150 million. Bid by the Pyramidic Cuisine, Barnaby exclaimed, and seeing as the bidding had finally stopped, he gave everyone one last piece of warning. Ladies and gentlemen, because this is not a normal bid, and is something that I arranged myself, the rules of the auction will be a little bit different this time around. There will be no bidding for the amount of fighters in the game. All participating companies will need 5 ordinary fighters to compete for them in one part of the pocket dimension. 5 is needed because it corresponds to the 5 drops of Su that are currently up for auction. Next, the winner of the highest bid will be able to dictate the amount of magnetics allowed inside the pocket dimension. All subsequent matching bids will only have to submit 90% of the highest bid to participate in the game. Barnaby's announcement completely changed the whole premise of the auction. Normally, having the highest bid of an item gave them no advantage whatsoever. That was because other people would have an equal bid for it to participate in the game. But now, there was a direct advantage on being the highest bidder. And the fact that companies could bid 90% of the highest bid to participate in the game meant that there would be more competitors in the end. Knock! This time, Beau from the Pyramidic Cuisine submitted another bid. 200 million, Barnaby exclaimed. At this point, everybody thought that the Pyramidic Cuisine would finally win the bid. But if there were any observant people in the crowd, they would notice that one company hadn't yet submitted their bid. The Reborn company was strangely silent. Meanwhile, Michael finally raised his hand and knocked on the tinted glass and submitted a new increased bid.
How?
300 million, offered by the Reborn company. As soon as Michael's bid came through, many people immediately got intimidated. His dominant display of wealth was still very much imprinted on their minds, and it looked like he would try to do it for this item as well. They're really rich. With this, only the Rising Six can compete with him. It's amazing that such an unknown company can even make the Rising Six unable to catch up in terms of wealth. After this large bid, Barnaby began counting down. 300 million going once, going twice, declared. For any company that wants to participate in the game, you will have to bid 270 million for the item. Immediately, 6 knocks resounded throughout the arena. Michael would have to fight the Rising Six. Amazing! Now, because of their highest bid, the privilege of setting the number of magnetics in the game comes to the Reborn company. Of course, Michael knocked only once on the tinted glass. Barnaby nodded, taking, "It is decided. There will be only 1 magnetic and 5 officers per company allowed in the pocket dimension. Companies, please prepare your fighters." Chapter 537, Lock and Key. Prepare to feast your eyes upon the magnificent pocket dimension that I have prepared for all of you, Barnaby announced as he once again stepped out of the stage. The white platform split in half and slowly crawled out of view, revealing a giant hole in the middle. Within this chasm, everyone could peek through and see a ginormous world that seemed to teem with life and variety. It looked really big, as if they had stepped into a new world entirely. Here's the rules of the game. To comply with the rules of the association, the normal fighters and magnetics are separated into 2 distinct parts of the pocket dimension. 5 of your ordinary fighters will land on the left side of the world, while the magnetics are put onto the right side. Both cannot interact with each other, but the results of one will heavily affect the other. The pocket dimension world was separated into 2 through an opaque wall that split the land in half, stretching all the way to the skies and all the way underground, just like Barnaby said. The left side was further separated into 5 sections, each one having its own terrain and topography. One was a desert covered with mounds of sands. One was a mountainscape with several high-reaching snow-tipped mountains. The other was an overground labyrinth made out of some kind of stone. The fourth was a dense and thick forestry rich with plant and animal life. And the last one looked like it was inside a volcano with magma flowing through the cracked ground and geysers spontaneously spouting steaming hot water all over. We shall call the left side as the key. The key side has 5 sections, each one corresponding to a single drop of Spirit of Old. There shall be only 1 designated fighter per company allowed inside each section at a time. The goal of those fighters is to find one of the keys hidden somewhere in the terrain. There are enough of these keys for all fighters in the section. If you are able to obtain this key, then your company will be eligible to obtain a single drop of Su. If you can't find it or you get knocked unconscious, then your company will be forfeiting their chance to get that specific drop of Su. So, there are two choices for all of your fighters. First is to focus on finding the keys hidden in the environment. Mind you, I have made it very hard to find. Or you can choose the second option, which is to eliminate all of your opponents from contention. If you are the only person left in the section, then even if you haven't found the key, then your company is immediately eligible for the drop of Su. Now, let's talk about the right side of the territory named Lock. The right side was only about half the size of the left side and had only a single uniform terrain in its entirety. It looked like any normal piece of land with a bunch of trees, a river that ran through from north to south, and a small mountain to the side. The only interesting piece about the right side called the Lock was the dome structure in the very middle, which seemed to be made out of glass like a greenhouse. Michael could see 5 pillars inside the glass dome, each one containing the vial of Su. Now, the right side of the pocket dimension is reserved for the magnetic of your company. Your goal here is to get inside the glass dome. To do so, you must have at least one key in the possession of your teammate from the other side. Once you have entered, then you can touch one of the pillars and obtain the drop of Su for yourself. Of course, if your team was only able to get one key, then you'll only be able to unlock one drop. As before, you have two choices in getting the Su drops. First is by relying on your teammates to get the keys that you need. And second is to simply eliminate your opponents until you are the only one left. If you are the only magnetic left, then all the Su will automatically be yours to obtain. This game basically had two modes of winning. First is to follow the rules like getting the keys and using it to get the Su. And the second is to defeat all the other opponents until there was only one man left standing. And because the Rising Six were intelligent, they quickly understood the rules of the game and began strategizing with their teams. They began to discuss who among them would be put onto the magma section, the snowy mountain section, and all the others of the key region. And of course, since there was only one magnetic allowed in this game, it was obvious that each company chose the strongest among them. And for the Rising Six, those were none other than the Rising Six themselves. And while all of them had serious expressions and wore their game face on, there was a completely different vibe going on in the Reborn Company VIP suite. "This is bad. I forgot to put the pizza in the oven," Zion muttered out with a ghastly expression. "You idiot," Jaku reprimanded him. "Now what are we going to eat later? Ugh, can I go back?" Watching this, Max and the other Vanderbilts were completely stunned. Even though they were perhaps entering one of the biggest stages in Metropolis, they weren't even taking it seriously at all. They didn't know if they should worry for them or not. After all, the Rising Six were formidable all on their own. But in this auction, they'd have to fight them all and somehow win. They would have thought that they would be knee-deep in planning by now. But instead, they were just worrying about pizza. Michael, is this okay?" Max asked. "Nah, it's fine. I'll have our chefs bake the pizza before we arrive." "No, the auction. Oh, that. They're ready for it, I think," he said, tilting his head with a little bit of doubt. Thankfully, Shiina got everyone's attention to focus on the task at hand. "Everyone, please prepare for the auction properly." What are we supposed to do again? I didn't understand it." Hee. Zion chuckled to himself. Shiina wanted to smack her little brother, but she restrained herself knowing that they had to be in the best condition possible for the game. "You just have to worry about finding the key in your region," she stated. "Or you can just wait until someone else gets it and you can steal it from them," Fudge suggested with an evil grin. Jaku overheard this and immediately considered it. That's quite a good idea. I can just sleep for the majority of the game and let all the others do the work for me. I'll just quietly find the key. I don't want to fight the others," Omisu muttered out shyly. Ho. That is indeed a reliable plan, Miss Omisu. I shall copy your idea as well. I will be digging the ground and find that key no matter what. I just hope that I don't find any bones there. Shudders. "Grieve, you are made out of bones," Michael reminded him. "Oh, ho, I forgot." Chapter 538. Reborn's appearance. Michael's team consisted of the 4 Dragonborn siblings and Grieve. It was the lineup that he thought would bring them victory on the pocket dimension. And despite them not looking like they were taking this seriously, he knew that he could depend on them once the going gets tough. They would pull through for him. Once your team is ready, please go down into the arena. They were anticipating the entrance of the Rising Six and their best officers. It was not every day that they would get to see these young generations of talents fight amongst each other in a single venue. The best part about it was that the outcome of this bid could totally change the outcome of the Rising Six rankings. Finally, magic lights beamed down into the ground as Bo and 5 of her best fighters entered from one side of the arena. Her entrance was met with a lot of applause and admiration. She walked down the steps, her blonde curly hair swinging back and forth with grace and aplomb. That's Bo Regard. She's ranked first. And look at her team. She went all out on this one. She's planning on extending her lead as the best of the Rising Six. I'm rooting for her. She's the most likely among them to reach the major factions in the future. We may be looking at a future legacy. One by one, each of the Rising Six walked down the steps and took their respective spots on the stage. Every one of them were met with applause and cheering. And it may be a coincidence, but they all came down in the same exact order as their rankings in the Golden 500. First was Bo from the Pyramidic Cuisine. Next was Fim the Boy with Bangs from the Angelic Crafts. After him was the cowboy man Reptar from Crocodile Leather. Next to him was Erlo's the khaki-wearing man from the Alligator Company. And then after him was the muscular Tenzing from the Mountain Movers. Last but not least was Reena from Spice Vice, who received widespread applause which came primarily from men who liked her for her beauty. She came down wearing her traditional flowy green silk dress, with a thin veil that covered her face and made her all the more alluring. Whoa! She's too beautiful. Reena, marry me. She might be the last-ranked Rising Six member, but that's still. Reena ignored all of the men talking and walked to her corner of the stage. Underneath her veil, she couldn't help but sneak a peek at the empty spot right next to her team. The only one left was him. What am I even doing? She reprimanded herself. I'm going to ignore him. He doesn't matter. The only thing that I should care about is the Sudrops. She shook her head and inwardly blamed her father for putting all those ideas of marriage in her head. He must be crazy to think that she could consider a kid like him as her marriage partner. Just then, the final magical light beamed down onto the stage. Everyone immediately turned their heads towards the last team participating. Throughout this auction, they'd seen firsthand how the Reborn company showed wealth that could even go toe-to-toe against the Rising Six. Still, the company was shrouded in mystery. They didn't know anything besides their name and their wealth. This would be the first time that they would get to see the person in charge of the Reborn company. I wonder who it is. They must be a hermit that gathered their wealth after hundreds of years. No, they gotta be a weathered middle-aged man that hates attention. All sorts of theories were thrown around, with the anticipation building even higher as the steps slowly echoed throughout the auction. And finally, as they started walking down, people got their first glimpse at Michael and his company. Everyone's eyes widened. At the very center of their team was a 13-year-old kid with golden hair and a carefree smile on his face. He wasn't anything like anyone had expected. No way. The owner of the Reborn company is that kid? Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it's that hooded figure over there. Despite Michael being in the clear center of their formation, people's first thought was that Grieve must have been the enigmatic leader of Reborn. However, as they took their spot on the stage, Michi moved away from his team and stood on the rightmost side of the platform, among the other 6 leaders of the Rising Six. This made it official. He was the leader of the Reborn company. Gasps of disbelief washed over the crowd. He owns a company at that age? Because of this, all those feats of Reborn showing off their wealth was now recontextualized in everyone's minds. They couldn't believe that a boy his age was able to command a company with such enormous wealth. Not only that, but the fact that he was in the lock region of the pocket dimension meant that he was also a magnetic like the other Rising Six. As Michael took his spot, he could feel all sorts of stares looking at him. It wasn't malicious or anything, but he was definitely the center of attention. He even caught the attention of the people in the VIP suites. The Tower Master finally got a good glimpse at Michael. Putting a face to the name that gave him a few heart attacks was a little bit comforting. Meanwhile, Kruger, the Heavenly Knight, immediately recognized Michael and finally remembered him. That's the guy who sells us chocolates, he realized. He's reached Metropolis already? The Rising Six were more surprised than the others. After all, many people considered them to be geniuses and prodigies because of all they achieved in their young age. But seeing Michael even younger than them made them feel a lot older. They would have thought he was older, or at least the same age as them. To fight off the awkwardness, Michael turned to Reena, who was right next to him, and greeted her. "Hey, we saw each other back in your headquarters." Despite his greeting, Reena barely even acknowledged his presence. She kept her eyes on the pocket dimension, actively ignoring his looks. She's really serious about this game, he thought. Now that everyone was in their respective positions, Barnaby gathered everyone's attention with his booming voice. "Players, as soon as you step inside the pocket dimension, you will be transported in a random location among your regions. Are you all ready?" Everyone nodded. "Jump in." As soon as he said that, people began diving into the pocket dimension feet first, with some kind of magic transporting them directly on the ground. Reena was among the first to go, and Michael was among the last. Before he jumped in, Barnaby gave him a subtle thumbs up to give him good luck. He nodded in thanks before jumping into the pocket dimension as well. Once everyone was inside the game, the discussions among the crowd started. "Bo will definitely get the most drops. Did you see her power while she was standing there? I think that Fim and the angelic crafts will get at least 1 or 2. I don't know about you guys, but I'm rooting for the magnificent Reena. She's underrated." In all the guesses and predictions about who would get the drops, the Reborn company's name didn't come up a single time. Chapter 539. Into the game. Michael stepped into the giant hole in the middle of the stage, with his body slowly passing through the pocket dimension's threshold feet first. As soon as his head passed through the portal, his vision changed from an endless blue sky to a thick collection of trees around him. It wasn't a moment later did his feet land squarely upon dry soil did he finally realize that he was directly transported randomly into the territory. That was smooth. It didn't feel like transportation at all. It felt like I was just walking through a door. He looked around and tried to find his position relative to the map itself. Of course, one of the best things to do in this situation was to fly over the trees and see the entire map in a top-down perspective. However, he realized that this may not be a good idea since it could bring a lot of attention onto him from the start. After all, one of the good tactics to win in this game was to eliminate all the competition and get the drops all for yourself. He wouldn't be surprised if the entire Rising Six converged onto his location once he peeked above the crowns of the trees. Thankfully, this pocket dimension is still governed by the rules of mana. He used his supreme talent to see the world the way mana saw the world. The trees and everything around him turned into a collection of natural mana, mostly earth, water, and one of the rarest things to see in the natural world was light mana. So any life form that lived and breathed stood out like a sore thumb even from far away. This way, he could see where his opponents were located relative to himself. As he scanned his surroundings, he expected to see only a few collections of light mana around him. He thought he'd have to play it like everything was a Where's Waldo book as he tried to discern the tiniest bit of pixel in his vision. But as he looked at everything, he saw collections of light mana sprawling everywhere. There were those as small as an ant, and those as big as an elephant. Now, animals weren't that uncommon in the pocket dimension. He saw them frequently during the games of the auction and properly prepared for their presence here. However, as he looked at all the life forms around him, he realized that they were no ordinary living beings at all. Their very presence was amplified by an intense collection of mana. These weren't animals. These were monsters. Unlike normal animals, these living beings could command magic and mana just as well as humans could, if not better. It wasn't taught to them. It was ingrained into their very body through years and years of natural evolution. This meant that their efficiency and their power could surpass even that of normal humans. And judging from the concentration of mana in their bodies, some of them were as powerful as 7-star or 8-star monsters. Although he was certain that he could survive or even win against them, he didn't want to take that chance. Looks like I have to be careful. And just as he thought that, he suddenly heard Barnaby's voice projected up from the skies. Players, as you may have noticed, you are not alone in this pocket dimension. I have personally added my monsters into the territory to make sure that people didn't simply just stay in one place and hide until their teammates found a key. If they did, then they could easily find themselves being hunted down by one of the apex predators of the natural world. Be careful, players, for these 7-star monsters are hungry for blood. After hearing this, Michael took a cursory glance around him to make sure that there weren't any monsters nearby. Once he was sure he was alone, he sat down next to a tree and took out his drone from his pocket. Although Barnaby explicitly warned them not to stay in one place, Michael decided to take the risk because he wanted a full view of the territory. He wanted to know what was happening in the other parts of the map, as well as where the glass dome was located. That place would be the end goal for everyone once their teammates got the key. He pushed the side of the drone's frame and a box container shot out, allowing Michael to take out its glasses. After taking another look at his surroundings and finding no one, he put on the glasses and entered the drone vision. He saw the world turn black for a brief second before his consciousness was transferred over to the drone. With a single thought, the propellers started to rotate at buzzing speeds, allowing the drone to be lifted up. He was able to carefully maneuver the drone through the thick and leafy branches of the trees before finally breaking through the crown and seeing the wide blue skies of the pocket dimension. He hovered above the trees for a brief second, using his supreme talent once again to make sure that there was no one around him. After a second of checking, he flew the drone sky high, allowing him to have a topographical view of the pocket dimension. To the left, he saw the opaque partition separating the two regions of the territory. That was where the Dragonborns were currently at. Of course, he had no intention of crossing over the borders. First of all, he didn't know if he'd get expelled because of cheating, and second of all, he trusted them to get the keys for him. Looking at the northeast side, he saw the glass dome that contained the Sudrops. And scattered around the dome, he saw a dense grouping of high-leveled monsters just standing guard. The closer it was to the glass dome, the more dense and stronger the monsters became. Some of these monsters were so big in size that he didn't even need to use his supreme talent to see it. Their long heads and massive spiked bodies dwarfed the trees surrounding them. ChatJK4, please make a mini-map of this world that shows me my current location. Understood. Forming an HUD element. Complete. Michael saw a slightly transparent rectangular map overlaying his current vision of the world. On the very bottom right quadrant of the map, he saw a pinging dot that symbolized his current location. With this mini-map, he was confident he'd eventually find his way onto the glass dome when he needed to. Should I explore? He pondered. As long as I fly at a high distance, no one should notice me. He wanted to see where the Rising Six members were located. And if there weren't any monsters roaming around the territory, Michael would have wanted to stay in his drone vision and continue to look at everything that was happening in a third-person perspective. He hoped to stumble upon the Rising Six and get more information about them, their strengths, weaknesses, and especially their divas and ability. And just as he was about to move his drone forwards, he suddenly saw something move towards his direction in a rush. Chapter 540, First Encounter. With his 360-degree vision, he was able to see something small and fast running towards his direction. Is it a monster? He asked himself. Whatever it was using magic which was causing it to mix with the light mana in their body, meaning that he couldn't quite make out what kind of monster they were. Now, it wasn't running directly towards him, but if they continued to run in that direction, then they would stumble upon him sitting down beside a tree. Looking at the surroundings more, he realized that they were getting chased by a much bigger monster the size of a gorilla. He quickly exited out of his drone vision, and within a moment, he found himself back in his old body, with the drone left behind and slowly flying down to his location. He turned his head to the sounds of trees breaking and crashing into the ground echoed through the forest. As he squinted his eyes and peered through the thick crowd of trees, he finally saw what it was that was coming towards him. And as it turned out, it wasn't a what. It was a who. A woman with brown olive skin and black flowy hair jumped through branches and shrubs with elegance and grace. Her thin green veil and scarf flowed beautifully behind her like fish in water. Contrary to that image, the one coming towards her was a giant monster hybrid of a gorilla and a tiger. Its gray skin and black fur could break through boulders and stones without a scratch. Not only that, but its striped tiger head showed two enormous fangs that could tear through an elephant with one bite. This Reena, he realized, and she's being chased by a 5-star monster. Should I help her? Since he had a business agreement with her father, he thought that it wasn't such a bad idea to possibly team up with Reena. After all, there was no reason for them to fight. Keys were the only thing important in this game. It didn't matter if they teamed up or not since there were 5 drops that could be shared. And he wouldn't be surprised that other people from the Rising Six had also teamed up to get a better chance of winning. If he was going to be teamed up with someone, then it was much better to team up with someone he already knew. He stood up and announced his presence. As soon as he did that, Reena's head turned in his direction. Her eyes showed surprise and conflict, as if she wasn't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing to see another player this early in the game. To convey his wish to work together, he waved his hand as a welcome. He was even about to go and fight the gorilla tiger monster for her, but it looked like she was going to take care of it all by herself. She reached behind her back and revealed 2 scimitars, one yellowish-white and the other violet-black. Almost the entire blade itself glowed with power, meaning that the weapon was a mithril relic in good condition with barely any rust. She didn't seem to acknowledge his greeting and quickly turned around to the gorilla tiger. Using her stable footing on one of the tree's branches, she shot towards the monster with her scimitars in a crossed pattern. The gorilla tiger beat its chest and charged towards her, accepting her challenge. As she got closer, the monster raised its 2 giant fists and slammed it down just as Reena arrived in front of it. Sparks flew out from the moment of impact, with Reena being thrown to the ground. The gorilla tiger smiled, thinking that it won. But then it noticed that it hadn't completely crushed the human at all. Reena stood with her feet on the ground, with cracks on the soil propagating as she fought against the weight and power of the monster. A magic circle appeared beneath her feet. The ground rumbled for a brief second before a rectangular pillar burst forth from the floor and hit the gorilla tiger directly in its head. The monster recoiled back, its chin aching from the magic. Still, it was unhurt. It growled and bared its fangs, intending to crush the human that dared to injure it. But before it could even attack, Reena suddenly appeared just a few feet away from the monster's head, with her scimitars held out horizontally next to her. And with the momentum she gathered, Reena began twirling in the air before hitting the gorilla tiger's chest, hitting it with the force of continuous slashes. The sound of metal clinking continuously rang out in the forest as Reena spun in the air and hit the monster with her scimitar with each revolution. At first, the gorilla tiger's thick skin allowed it to withstand the first few attacks. But as Reena continued to spin, the monster's defenses kept getting whittled down until blood spurted out of its chest. Grao. The monster jumped away, creating separation between him and Reena. Angry, its body began to glow red with power as it used its innate skill to increase its power even further. Its black fur began to turn red as flames spontaneously erupted from its body. It banged its chest again, and with each slam, its fiery fur roared with it. It immediately lunged towards Reena, its giant fists balled up in flames, and its fangs turning as orange as magma. The monster tried to grab Reena, but she swung both of her scimitars and created a crescent made out of pure earth mana to deflect it away from her, giving her enough time to dodge away. Its fists crashed towards a tree and immediately turned part of the tree burnt black. Reena squatted down and closed her eyes before jumping up in the air, her scimitars crossed on her chest. Just then, red dust started to flow around her like strings. There wasn't a magic circle anywhere on her body, meaning that those red dust weren't made out of mana at all. It's her ability, Michael realized, and it was at that moment that that same red dust started to gather above Reena's head. These dust began to coagulate and form into the curvy torso similar to that of a woman's torso. The dust continued to form upwards and upwards, before finally reaching the head. The dust formed the general shape of a human head before its features became molded. Michael realized that the red dust wasn't just forming one face. It was forming 3 faces at the same time. 3 facets of a woman appeared on Reena's diva. They all looked like they were the same woman, but their expressions were completely different. The one at the front showed a serious and solemn expression. The one on the right showed a happy and smiling face. And the one on the left showed a combination of anger and sadness. Once her diva had formed, more and more red dust surrounded Reena. And as she started to rotate in the air, the red dust continued to rotate with her, forming a sort of galaxy disk shape that spun as fast as a top. Chapter 541. Brush with Reena. The gorilla tiger's eyes turned from being the hunter into the hunted. It realized the power and destruction by those red dust that surrounded Reena. It wanted to run away, but the fear of the diva woman with 3 faces bearing down on it made its muscles stiffen tight. By the time it regained control over its own body, Reena had already finished her transformation into a red dust Beyblade and slammed herself onto the monster's chest. Its fiery fur tried to fight off the dust that was slowly disintegrating its armored skin, but no matter how hot the monster tried to burn it with, the red dust remained unharmed. Reena's spinning red cloud of Beyblade continued to sandblast the gorilla tiger with red dust at super high speeds, eventually disintegrating its skin and fur until blood was drawn. And with one last move, Reena stopped rotating and revealed herself within the red dust, with her pair of scimitars slicing the monster diagonally. The gorilla tiger got thrown backwards with force. Its huge body crashed through multiple trees, destroying them into splinters, before eventually landing on a collection of felled tree trunks, unconscious. Reena landed on both feet perfectly before casually swinging her scimitars in the air to get rid of the blood pooling in its blade. Watching this, Michael had the instinct to clap for her wonderful display of power. Her diva and her ability looked tremendously destructive, especially with those red dust that Michael estimated to each be as strong as a diamond. "Looks like you don't need my help after all," he said to her jokingly. Reena slowly turned around to face Michael. And strangely enough, there wasn't a friendly look on her face. Hello?" he asked her. She tilted her head and slowly raised the scimitars in her hand, as if she was about to use them. At this point, Michael knew that she was just a hair's breadth away from fighting him. He quickly raised his hands to signal that he wasn't planning on being hostile towards her. "I come in peace," he reminded her. But still, Reena walked towards him, scimitars in hand, and diva still manifested above her. Those red dust continued to revolve around her, pulsating with each step she took. "Okay, now, there's no need to do this," he warned her. "We could be allies, friends even." That didn't do the trick. She continued to approach him with an angry look on her face, similar to the left face of her diva. He would have thought that he did something bad to her, but he noticed that she wasn't exactly mad at him. She was mad at something, and he was just in the way. "Okay, if you don't want to be friends, that's fine. We can just be acquaintances. Or maybe not. I think that we should just go our own ways. How about it?" He didn't want to fight her at all. Not only was he trying to keep a low profile, but Reena was also the daughter of Vishnu, who was the main producer of sugar for his soda business. He didn't want to sully that relationship over a useless fight that wouldn't achieve anything. But no matter what he said to her, Reena wasn't listening. She continued to walk towards Michael before she finally stopped. "I need to prove to my father that I can bring Spice Vice to the top, all by myself," she muttered underneath her breath. At first, she wanted to completely avoid Michael so that she wouldn't have to deal with what her father told her to do, which was to get close to Michael and earn his heart. But now, out of pure coincidence, he was the first person she saw out of all of them. Michael wanted to ally with her, but this was the exact opposite thing she wanted to do. She wanted to prove that she was strong enough by herself, and that she didn't need him or anyone else to win. Her red dust swirled as they gathered near her palm. It gathered up and coagulated into a small bird. And surprisingly enough, as the bird finished its formation, its wings started to flutter with life. Its beak opened wide like a baby crying at its birth. She then threw the bird into the air before it started to flutter its wings and fly. Reena continued to make doves from the red dust around her, eventually creating 20 identical birds that flew around her and on top of her. Her dust can create objects and animals, Michael noted. I guess she can create anything in her imagination. As he was observing her ability, Reena commanded the doves towards Michael's direction. These birds might look innocent, but their beaks were as strong as a diamond tip. Michael would have to be even more careful since they weren't made out of mana at all, but produced by her diva. "I'm not going to marry you," Reena screamed out. Hearing this caught Michael off guard, almost letting one of the birds scrape by the side of his head. "What? Who said anything about marrying you?" he shouted back at her. But she didn't seem to care as she rushed towards him with both scimitars ready to cleave him in half. Not only that, but there were about 20 doves hovering above Michael, just waiting for the right moment to swoop down and peck through his entire body. Meanwhile, on the auction itself, the crowd was drawn towards the action on the bottom left side of the pocket dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first fight in the lock region. Michael from the Reborn Company and Reena from Spicevice have found themselves on opposite sides, Barnaby announced. The crowd used their binoculars to peer through the hole and onto Michael and Reena. There, they saw Michael being forced on the defensive as Reena continued to swing her scimitars towards him. Not only that, but her red dust doves were circling above him, diving down at any opportunity they got to pester Michael. Look at Reena's excellent ability control. She's controlling 20 of those birds at the same time as she's fighting him. She got better than last year. I think she has a chance to go up the rankings during this auction. I respect this Michael kid. He's not only rich, but it's also impressive that he can last this long against Reena. Many people were amazed at Michael's wealth and were even rooting for him to last longer in the auction. However, they considered it his bad luck that he encountered Reena so early in the game. They thought that the only way Michael could have a chance at those drops was if he stayed in stealth throughout the entire game and sneakily crawled to the glass dome to get the drops once he had the keys. But now that Reena was attacking him, they didn't think he had a chance against her. Of course, there were a few sharp-eyed individuals who saw that despite being forced to back away from Reena, Michael was never in any sort of danger at all. He seemed to be waiting and quietly observing everything he could about Reena's ability. Chapter 542. Reena's Dust. Michael used a simple earth wall to defend against one of Reena's scimitar. Her sharp blades and quick turning momentum were able to tear through the wall quite easily, but this gave him enough time to dodge away from the 5 doves that pecked at his body. A magic circle appeared in front of his palm, manifesting a fireball upscaled to a 5th star spell. With a single thought, the fireball shot towards one of the birds that was swooping down towards him. The ball and the bird met in the mid-air, creating a fiery explosion. The fireball was able to successfully destroy the bird's body, turning it into nothing but dust. But despite getting hit by the magic spell head-on, the red dust remained completely unharmed. And just a few seconds later, the cloud of dust formed into another dove as if nothing ever happened. As expected, it's not affected by normal spells. How about a spell that's abnormal? While Reena continued to swing her scimitars at him, Michael used simple air magic to let himself be taken by the flow of the air. This allowed him to much more easily dodge her attacks. And while he was preoccupied with her, one of the doves swooped down and targeted his shoulder. This time he didn't dodge away. He let the red dust dove come extremely close to his skin. But of course, before he could get injured, an invisible prismatic shield appeared around him and protected him from the attack. The red dust dove met with Michael's unity defense. The bird's beak was where the red dust was most concentrated, so it was to briefly bend Michael's unity barrier. But as it had prolonged contact with the prismatic shield, the beak started to disintegrate and melt. The bird, feeling threatened for the first time, quickly flew away from him with half of its beak missing entirely. It was at this point that Michael noticed that there wasn't any red dust coming to regenerate the bird's beak. It remained in that injured state until Reena herself threw a few dust powder into the bird and healed its broken beak back into its peak form. I see. That's the downside of her ability, he realized. Her red dust only has a limited quantity. Once destroyed, it can't go back. Knowing about this made his fight with Reena a little bit easier. As long as he could destroy her red dust, then his victory was only a matter of time. How did you do that? Reena questioned him, frightened. She didn't think that Michael would be able to destroy her red dust so soon. He wasn't even using his magnetic ability yet. It was all because of that strange invisible shield that was around him. Angry, she commanded the rest of her birds to bombard Michael with their clawed feet, hoping to break through his shield. At the same time, she jumped up towards him and rotated her body in midair, creating a powerful twister with her scimitar. It was a two-pronged attack with her birds. In response, Michael created two magic circles at the same time. One of them summoned a snake-like dragon made out of pure air mana. As the doves rushed towards Michael, it brushed past them and caused some of the doves to be caught up in its wind. The second magic circle created a very viscous type of water similar to slime. And as Reena's rotating body reached towards him, he commanded the slime water to go in front of him. Her scimitar, with the speed of almost at 1000 RPM, would have tore through anything it touched. But as it made contact with the viscous slime, its speed began to get bogged down by the thickness of the liquid itself. Reena found herself falling to the floor as her momentum fell to zero. She landed on the ground and found her footing. Immediately, she commanded the red dust around her to vibrate at incredibly fast speeds to disintegrate the slimy water that covered her scimitar and her body. Meanwhile, at least half of the birds were able to pass through the air dragon and finally reached Michael's body. The red dust birds spiraled around him before diving down, beak first. A total of 11 sharp beaks targeted most of his upper body and crashed into his prismatic shield. Some lucky doves skidded against the prismatic shield and slid off into the ground. Most doves, though, were stuck with their beaks plunged into the absolute unity defense, which was slowly getting disintegrated with the power of unity. Reena's face turned into one of panic as she realized that her dust was slowly disintegrating. Nothing she did seemed to be working at all. Even though she was at the peak of the 4th stage body formation, she couldn't break through Michael's simple defensive spell. That was supposed to be impossible. Because of this, a thought soon crept up in her mind. Was her father right? Was there more to this boy that meets the eye? Was he really stronger than what she thought? Was he stronger than her? And no, she cried out in denial. I can't fall now. She reached down on one of her pockets and grabbed a handful of whatever was inside it. She opened her hand, revealing it to be a mound of yellow dust similar to that of the red dust that was surrounding her. I didn't want to use this, but I have to win. After taking in a breath of fresh air, she quickly blew the yellow dust into the environment, which slowly disseminated through the air at an incredibly fast pace. Meanwhile, the people watching the fight from above immediately recognized that yellow dust that Reena blew out. She's using it this early. Is she planning on going all out already? I thought she'd save it for Bo. Am I the only one who doesn't know what that yellow dust does? There were a lot of people who watched the auction last year. Because of that, they were able to recognize Reena's strongest and perhaps most lethal ability. That yellow dust is literally poison. Anyone caught by it will only have a few minutes left until they're knocked unconscious. Can't anyone just hold their breath? That's not how abilities work. The fact that she brought it out meant that Michael is already poisoned immediately, no matter what he tries to do. After hearing this, a lot of people immediately thought that this was incredibly overpowered. If it's so powerful, then why didn't she use it earlier in the fight? That's because he's not the only one that's poisoned. She's affected as well. That's the drawback of her ability. Michael felt his breath become shallower and shallower. His head started to ache, with his vision starting to become topsy-turvy. Not only that, but he felt his body start to weaken, not just physically but also magically. It was as if his magic veins were slowly getting pinched, lowering the quantity of mana that was circulating in his body. He felt his knees start to weaken, almost making him fall to the ground. This is poison? But you're poisoned too. He looked forward and saw Reena in a similar shape as he was. She limped, struggling to even stand still. That's right. We'll have to fight in a poisoned condition. But I am used to it. I can fight better than you." Just as she was saying that, she suddenly saw Michael attach something to his chest. Then, a click sound echoed through the forest. Chapter 543, Poison Dominated. As soon as she heard that click, she saw Michael completely change from someone suffering from poison weakness to someone that was as healthy as a newborn. The color returned to his skin, his posture straightened up, and the power of mana circulated around his body and allowed him to feel his vitality returning to normal form. Reena couldn't believe what she was seeing. The poison that was supposed to have turned him as feeble as a 90-year-old was quickly reverted within the blink of an eye. It happened within an instant. But as she looked at Michael's entire body, the answer soon became clear. There was a faint figure of a pair of arms manifested above his head. It was his diva. He had finally used his ability to somehow counteract her poisoning and nullify it without problem at all. Reena took a step back in disbelief. She wanted to throw up. This was supposed to be her ultimate move, one that would have been able to defeat Bo and all the other Rising Six members easily. After all, the yellow dust that she used wasn't simply just a normal poison cloud. It didn't infect its users through contact. It used the power of her diva to contaminate Michael with her ability, no matter what. Even if he had that impenetrable shield, he would still feel the effects of her poison. She thought she'd finally gotten him, but now it was as if nothing had happened to him at all. Meanwhile, she was still sick with her own poison. Cough! You're also in the 4th stage. How did your ability overpower mine? She spent a year training herself and her abilities. Meanwhile, Michael looked like he had just transcended to the 4th stage quite recently. By all known metrics, her ability should have been able to overpower his. The crowd were just as surprised as Reena to see Michael come out of her poison yellow dust like it was nothing. They knew Reena was a formidable magnetic, and even Bo would have been caught vulnerable if she was hit with those yellow dust she carried around. Wow! Look at that. That must be Michael's diva. What kind of ability does he have? Did anyone see what he did? I saw him put something in his chest, but I don't know what it is. I guess his ability is some kind of healing power? With the appearance of Michael's diva, people soon realized that he wasn't just a kid who had a lot of money. He was someone who belonged with the likes of the Rising Six. It was especially apparent since he had shown that he could even fight toe-to-toe against Reena. Just 13 years old, and he's already in the 4th stage. That's nothing short of genius. But wait, where's his mithril relic? I don't see it anywhere. Oh, he must be using a small accessory type of mithril relic, just like Alaric's ring. Back in the game, Michael pleaded with Reena once again for her to see that fighting was useless. It's not too late to be allies, he reminded her. We don't have to eliminate each other. However, his pity seemed to have made her even more resistant to his suggestion. I can't. I have to do this by myself, she said, tears almost running down her cheeks. The poison made her feel even more vulnerable than before. Michael pursed his lips and felt a little bit sorry for her. She looked like she was carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders. She was being bogged down by the pressure she put on herself. Knowing that she wouldn't be persuaded no matter what, he knew he had no choice. He raised his hand and created a violet magic circle in front of his palms. A purplish-green liquid shot out of his hands and gathered in a ball. This was pure poison mana, and with his absolute control over it, he was able to form and mold this liquid into the form of a venomous black widow spider. It was 10 times the size of the original spider, and was colored purple and black, with poison dripping out of its skin. The black widow spider dropped into the ground and jumped towards Reena. Red dust gathered at her fingertips as she created a large eagle whose main source of prey were spiders exactly like the one Michael conjured with magic. The eagle cried out before intercepting the poison black widow's arc using its talons. Sensing the threat, the spider shot out a spray of poison web intending to poison the eagle and slow it down. But since the eagle was made out of an ability, it was completely impervious to normal magic and mana. It tore through the spray of web and continued to hunt down the spider. But the Black Widow was able to shoot a single thread of web towards the branch above, using it to pull itself upwards and completely avoid the eagle's hunt. Michael knew that this wasn't enough, so he conjured another magic circle in the air. This time it was colored neon blue, as it manifested a bolt of lightning that shot out at literal lightning speeds. Reena, still poisoned, conjured a thick protective barrier from her red dust to defend against the electric attack. But it seemed that the lightning wasn't aimed at her. Thunder crackled as the lightning arced upwards, completely avoiding Reena and hitting the violet Black Widow instead. An explosion rang out as the spider got caught with high-temperature plasma. The branch that it had been hanging onto was burned into a charcoal black, with some lightning streaks coming down into the tree itself. Reena thought Michael had miscalculated his attack, since it looked like he just destroyed his own magic spell. But as she looked up, she was completely shocked to see that not only was the Black Widow still in one piece, but its entire body was also crackling with electricity, as if the lighting imbued it into the construct. First of all, the crowd were once again surprised to see that Michael was able to create a realistic depiction of a spider using purely poison mana. Wizards and mages alike knew how difficult it was to imitate a life form using only one type of mana. He must have a talent for poison mana. That's really rare. Yeah, he must be really good at it too, since he could control that Black Widow with ease. And it was at that moment that they saw Michael shoot out the lightning arc into his own spider. The crowd were about to complain that Michael had just wasted his own mana, but then they saw something that made them lean forward in shock. The Black Widow was now imbued with the power of lightning mana. It was as if the spider had been bathed in electricity, and could now wield it as if it was a stormy cloud. What? He changed his own spell as it is being cast. I didn't know that was even possible. It's not supposed to be. That's only possible if someone has a mastery over the 2 mana. Chapter 544, Elemental Black Widow. Creating an animated spell like the Black Widow was already complicated enough. But then Michael went ahead and changed the very magic theory of the spell completely out of the blue, and while the Black Widow was still casted into the real world. The difficulty for such a feat was almost impossible. Even the very best and most senior wizards would not be able to replicate this exact scenario while in the comfort of their own homes. Meanwhile, Michael did it in a high-stakes environment while fighting a magnetic of his own level. That means he has 2-element mastery. I see now why he's the leader of the Reborn company. He's not only rich, but he's also talented in the mystic arts. Coupled with his strange magnetic ability, I think he has a real chance of defeating Reena at this point. Back in the game, Reena stared at the electrically charged Black Widow with shock written all over her face. She was starting to realize that she completely underestimated his skills in the mystic arts. But she resolved herself. If she could hang on a little bit longer, the poison in her body would wear off. This would be a doable task since she knew that despite the double-element Black Widow above her, it wouldn't affect her as long as she used her red dust as proper defense. The Black Widow faced Reena and shot out 3 bursts of web in her direction. Each one was charged. She commanded her red dust to coalesce into a dense liquid-like splash that would wash the web away from her. The webs hit the thick red dust wave, unable to pierce through. However, the Black Widow jumped down from the tree and used the floating red dust wave to swing below it and shoot another web towards Reena. She wrapped the red dust onto her 2 scimitars and used it to hit the webs away from her and cut it from its source. The severed webs slowly floated down into the ground. However, what she didn't realize was that the webs were still charged with electricity despite it being cut off. The webs touched down onto one of the wet grass blades, and immediately, a surge of electricity burst forth and electrified the entire ground. At the very last second, Reena created boots out of red dust, allowing her to be unaffected by the electricity. She knew that it would only be a matter of time until she couldn't react fast enough to defend herself, so she went ahead and attacked Michael head-on. This was one of the best ways to deal with a mage. As she rushed towards him, Michael jumped up and floated in the air. But it looked like Reena was waiting for that as she coated her scimitars with red dust, allowing it to become 20 times bigger than normal. With her giant weapons, she sliced horizontally towards Michael from different directions. Tens of trees were cut in half as her giant blade traveled through the air. But instead of panicking, Michael created two giant magic circles in front of him. One was glowing with a bright white light, and the other was dark and was made out of shadows. Reena's eyes narrowed as she realized what Michael was trying to do. She quickly retracted the red dust from her scimitar and used it to create a giant shield behind her. As she turned around, she realized her hunch was right. The Black Widow was right behind her, about to shoot out another burst of electric web. She used her red dust to create a platform underneath her feet, keeping her away from the ground and avoiding another electrical ground situation. She then waited for the lightning to crack, but it didn't come. It was at that moment that the white magic circle shot out a beam of light outwards, hitting the Black Widow as if it had been illuminated by the sun itself. The spider soaked in all the light it could contain, eventually allowing it to glow with power. "What? Another one?" she blurted out. The light on the spider continued to grow brighter with intensity before it created a flashbang that completely blinded everyone temporarily. Reena's red dust slowly formed away from her eyes as she looked at what happened with the Black Widow. In front of her was the same spider she had been fighting against this whole time. However, there were now two other, much smaller, spiders hanging on a web string right next to it. As she looked around, she realized that it wasn't just too many spiders, but 8 of them all together, surrounding her entirely. The worst part was that they were all electrically charged just like their mother. And without a second later, all the spiders looked in her direction and sprayed out electrically charged webs in her direction. Reena braced herself, creating a cocoon of red dust that completely encapsulated her from everything around her. Now that she was safe, she closed her eyes and focused on recovering from her own poison. With this defensive cocoon, she'll have all the time she needs. Everyone was once again in disarray as they saw Michael imbue the spider with another element. This time it was the light element, allowing the spider to duplicate itself. He has a 3-element mastery. And not only that, but it's 3 of the 4 rarest element masteries in the world. How could a genius of the mystic arts be hidden for so long? Is he from the Guild of Arcana? Wait, he has another magic circle. Don't tell me. And just as they predicted, Michael's black magic circle shot out a beam of shadow that hit the original Black Widow. A gooey black substance began to envelope the magical spider, completely covering its bulbous body and 8 legs with pure dark mana. Once the shadows were fully absorbed, the Black Widow began to shimmer in and out of reality, signifying its ability to control 4 elements at once. 4-element mastery. Wait, Michael must be the genius boy from the news. The one that won the Upperwood District Tournament. That can't be. I remember people saying that the genius boy controlled water, air, earth, and fire. I must have heard it wrong. Now, despite this very impressive display of magic, they could only lament that Michael was fighting against someone who could make themselves completely impervious to mana. If it was any other fighter, then he could have finished the fight by now. He won't be able to defeat Reena while she's covered with her red dust. But it was at that moment that the Black Widow spiders began to crawl towards the red dust cocoon. What are they doing? They won't be able to affect something made out of an ability. Once all 9 magical spiders found their place on the red dust cocoon, their bodies began to pulsate with light. As the seconds passed, the pulsation became faster and faster, as if building up to something. Their bodies kept blinking and blinking before turning completely white. And a moment after that, their bodies exploded with such immense power that it destroyed everything around it. Chapter 545. Theoretical Explosion. Everything within a 10-meter diameter around the explosion turned into nothing but smithereens. The surviving trees around the crater tumbled outwards, causing other trees to fall, creating chaos. What was left was only a crater on the ground, which would have been bigger had the explosion happened on the floor. The crowd got up out of their seats and peered through the hole in the auction, trying to get a better view of what happened. Everyone gasped as they saw who was on the ground. Reena kneeled on the ground, her face and body a little bit dirted from the explosion. She held in her hands what remained of her red dust. Almost all of it was destroyed in the explosion. The only thing left was a small mound on top of her palms. Disbelief was written on her face. What? That's not possible. Those red dust are supposed to be protected by her ability. No kind of explosion from a spell could ever destroy it. This doesn't make sense. The only ones who knew what was happening were the wizards and the mages on the VIP suite reserved for the magic tower. It's true. The boy really does have masteries in all the elements. His control over them is extremely fine. That should only be achieved through 100 years of experience. Yet he's barely a teen. Tower Master, how did he destroy the red dust? Abilities should be impervious to magic spells. Everyone turned to their leader. Theoretically, a combination of the 4 elements, light, dark, poison, and lightning, will create an explosion of pure mana. Its destructive properties are different from any other bomb spell. It can explain how the red dust were destroyed in this instance. The Tower Master explained. The other senior wizards could only shake their heads. Even though they prided themselves in being eternal students of the mystic arts, they didn't know anything about that kind of explosion. Why isn't that well known? We should be focusing our research on this, suggested one of the mages. The Tower Master chuckled. The reason why not a lot of people know this is because this is one of the instances where it was only thought about theoretically. No one had ever made it practical before. Even I thought it would remain as just words on a paper for the foreseeable future. Clearly, Michael had proved that it was real. Not only that, but he was able to produce it in the middle of an auction fight. He's the real genius, the Tower Master muttered. Damn it, Braxton. Why aren't you here to see this? Because of the change in schedule, Braxton was still on his way to the auction. Just then, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by some of the mages and wizards pointing and shouting at something. And it wasn't just them. Practically everyone in the auction was almost up at their seats. Just a few kilometers away from Michael and Reena, everyone saw a large cloud of smoke coming towards them at incredibly fast speeds. Some of the people immediately recognized what it was. No way! How could they be so unlucky? What is it? Barnaby was also surprised, not expecting this development so soon. But as an auctioneer, he had to speak up and let everyone know what was happening. Hold on to your seats, folks. Looks like our players Michael and Reena are in deep trouble. Their fight seemed to have attracted the sleeping giants underneath the ground. They are now being hunted by the great colossal earthworm. It's one of the 8-star monsters inhabiting the pocket dimension. Michael looked at Reena, expecting her surrender. He had practically destroyed her only weapon. Hey! But it was at that moment that he felt the ground shaking with vigorous intensity. It must have been equivalent to a magnitude 9 earthquake, with how it was even uprooting trees from the ground. He quickly used his supreme talent to see what was happening at the source of the sound. And as he peered through the mana layer of reality, even he was caught off guard. He expected to see a monster like the gorilla tiger that had been hunting Reena before. But what he saw was something colossally bigger. Above ground, he saw the light mana signature of a mound that was just a little bit bigger than the trees. But then, as he looked on the ground, he saw that the small mound was just a tiny fraction of the creature's entire body. This was a worm. Not just any worm, but a monster whose diet consisted of mountains and skyscrapers. It bore a close resemblance to the giant worm creatures in a famous sci-fi novel in his previous world. It looked just as big as those fantasy worms. However, this one was a lot more terrifying, given its dense collection of mana particles around its body. Michael estimated it to be at the peak of the 8-star realm, which was something that could pose a real danger to him. Of course, he immediately started to look for ways to avoid the worm. If he stayed still, then he'd get swallowed up by the worm. With air mana gathered at his feet, he prepared to take the risk and fly out into the sky. The worm was moving fast, and it would only be a matter of a few seconds before it arrived. And just as he was about to escape, he stopped himself and looked back at the ground. Reena was staying still, kneeling on the ground and looking at her red dust still in disbelief. There was a look of despair in her face that looked like she was giving up on everything. "Get up!" he yelled at her. But she didn't move at all. The shaking in the ground got more and more intense before finally, the worm's giant mouth filled with spikes emerged from the ground, ready to devour its prey. It surfaced for a brief second before finally diving down towards him and Reena. He could still escape at this point, but Reena definitely wouldn't. She was accepting her defeat and welcomed the worm as if she was welcoming her end. The worm's giant face crashed into the ground, devouring everything and anything. What was left was a giant chasm in the ground, which led to the tunnel that the worm created below the surface. The crowd watching above were grabbing their seats with anxiousness. What happened? Did they survive? A few seconds later, everything settled down. The tremors stopped as the worm disappeared below ground, its hunger now satiated. Everyone looked for any sign of life near the giant chasm on the ground. But no matter where they looked, they saw no one. Not even Michael. Reena closed her eyes and let the darkness overcome her vision. She was giving up and letting herself be swallowed by the worm. But just as she fell into the chasm of blackness that was the worm's mouth, she suddenly felt something grab her body. She opened her eyes and saw Michael grabbing her waist and slowing their fall into the worm's stomach. Chapter 546. Inside the worm. Michael and Reena must have been falling for a solid minute as they traveled through the digestive tract of the worm. His original plan was to grab Reena and fly her out of the worm's mouth. However, he felt something in his chest that was calling to him. It was a strange feeling, one that he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know why he was feeling this way, but he knew that he could only find the answer at the bottom of the worm. What can it be? Maybe a treasure left behind by the auction? This was a good guess from Michael since he knew that Barnaby's auction happened once every year. It wouldn't be a stretch to think that they would reuse this specific pocket dimension throughout the different games of the bidding. Because of that, there must be a chance that the worm swallowed something during that time, and that something was good enough to be put in the auction. This was enough of a reason for him to take the risk and plunge himself deeper into the 8-star monster. So, with Reena at his side, they traveled down the worm's body before eventually landing softly at its stomach, which was flooded with a greenish acidic liquid that was slowly disintegrating the chunks of solid earth and fallen trees that it ate while on the surface. He landed onto a small floating island with a single oak tree still attached to the ground. He softly let down Reena into the ground. She was unconscious and sleeping, with her body slowly trying to recover from her own poison. And once they were safe, he took a gander at his surroundings. This place is quite cold, he remarked. Despite being inside the worm's stomach, the temperature was low enough for him to produce smoke while breathing through his mouth. He wouldn't be surprised if he found a block of ice somewhere around here due to how cold it was. The density of mana around here is also low. There's not much air mana around. There was a real solid risk of them suffocating if they were stuck here for too long. He knew he would be safe because he had his own air mana supply from his cores, but Reena would be left with nothing. I want to explore, but I can't leave here all alone here. Michael decided to build himself a temporary house made out of all the fallen trees that the worm swallowed. He began stacking logs in a rectangular pattern, following a simple wooden cabin blueprint that ChatJK4 gave him. Building something with his own hands again made him reminisce about the times when he was just a kid and he was building homes in the Vanderbilt estate. He has come a long way now. After building the roof, he then worked on creating a source of fire to keep himself warm. Using some firewood he chopped into planks, he used a simple fire spell to light up into a campfire. It was at this point that he felt some movement beside him. Reena had finally awoken from her sleep and was now starting to realize where she ended up. There was a look of despair on her face seeing the endless darkness of the worm's stomach. But then, her eyes softened once she saw Michael right outside of his wooden cabin, warming his hands on the campfire. "You're awake. Come, warm yourself up. It's cold out here," he told her. Reena shivered. Just like he said, the temperature here was comparable to a deep winter. I'm fine by myself," she said stubbornly, turning her head away. "I can perfectly take care of myself." She tried to command her red dust to form around her like a jacket. But then, she remembered that all that was left of her ability was a few pinches of dust. Her body continued to shiver. She can't take this cold for long. Not only that, but the low oxygen in here made her feel a little bit nauseous and dizzy. It was as if she was hiking at the top of a mountain. "Don't be a stranger," Michael shouted. "Sit by the campfire or you'll get frostbite." She bit her lips, conflicted. There was still some stubbornness inside her about wanting to become independent and self-reliant. But the cold, freezing temperatures of the environment forced her to reconsider. "You can have this campfire for yourself if you want. I'll just go inside the house," he told her. She quickly held up her hands. "No, it's fine. I'll sit by the fire." She slowly inched closer to the wooden log next to the fire. I'm just temporarily borrowing your campfire. I'll pay you back some other time," she said, her head turned away from Michael. "Is this what people call a tsundere?" he asked himself. "You know, you can just say thank you." Reena remained quiet and didn't reply. With the fire crackling, the two spent a few minutes in silence as their bodies warmed. "Why did you save me?" she asked him, her eyes downtrodden and looking at the fire. "You could have just escaped by yourself." Michael shrugged. "It looked like you needed saving." Reena made a self-deprecating chuckle. "I was the one that attacked you first, yet you still saved me. Let me ask you this. Why do you want Spice Vice to become part of the major factions?" She thought he was joking for a second. "Isn't it obvious? It's because I want our company to succeed." "And then what happens after that?" he asked her again. "What do you want to achieve?" His question left her speechless. In her pursuit of greatness, she had never once asked herself why she was doing what she was doing. She just focused on grinding, making herself better than before. And because of her efforts, she was able to make Spice Vice become part of the Rising Six. But if she was going to be honest with herself, she had no clue why she was doing this. "I don't know," she muttered out. "Well, I started my company because I wanted people to become comfortable. I wanted to create inventions that would improve the lives of everyone in this world. If I had let you die just because I wanted to win in the auction, then it would violate the very reason why I'm doing this in the first place." Reena looked up and looked at Michael. She saw the genuinity in his eyes. It wasn't the naive and innocent eyes that she had expected from a kid like him. Instead, she saw seriousness and dedication in his gaze. It was at that moment that her vision of Michael completely changed from a kid who didn't know what he was doing, to a man who knew exactly what he wanted to do and would do everything he can to achieve it. "HM? Is something wrong with what I said?" Michael asked her, wondering why she was staring. Reena's cheeks blushed before she quickly averted her gaze and completely turned her head away from him. "What am I doing? Stupid father. He's the one who put all of these ideas in my head." Chapter 547. Searching the worm's stomach. It was an unfortunate timing that her father's words rang inside her mind. "It's your chance to grab his heart, daughter. Take it." Reena slapped her own head to get rid of those silly thoughts. Just because her opinion of Michael changed, didn't mean that she was ready to marry him, or that he was ready to marry her. "Are you okay? Do you need some oxygen?" Michael asked her, inching closer to her to inspect. She quickly scooted away from him and waved her hands no. I'm fine. You can just stay there." Michael was only worried because he noticed that the oxygen in the environment was getting dangerously low. It would explain why Reena was acting so weirdly. He needed to make something that could help her breathe. He then raised his hand and created a magic circle in his palms. As mana flowed through his veins and into the circle, an invisible wave of energy propagated outwards. This was a simple search spell, one intended to find specific elements somewhere around the soil. The waves would bounce back as visible light once it found what he wanted to find. Soon enough, his vision was filled with glowing patches of rock and soil that illuminated the worm's dark stomach. He was a little bit worried that there weren't enough materials, but thankfully, the worm swallowed deep enough underground to contain all the specific metals he needed, like copper and zinc. Reena finally looked up and saw him using complicated magic spells to form and bend the minerals into two thin cylinders. One made out of copper and the other made out of zinc. "What are you doing?" she asked him. Michael smiled. "These are called electrodes. Once those electrodes were done, he just needed 2 more ingredients. One was water, which was easily done through a simple, the other was an acid liquid, which was plenty inside the worm's stomach. So, combining all those things together, Michael was able to make a makeshift water electrolysis, which was able to make oxygen that can be breathed in for the time being. He made a simple breathing mask using wood and connected it to a metal tank via leaf straws. The tank contained the water electrolysis contraption, which allowed it to be filled with oxygen gas that can be breathed in using the mask. "Here, try this on," he said, leaning towards her. "What are you?" Reena was flustered and became unable to run away from Michael's mask. "Breathe." Although he was giving her instructions on how to use the mask, she couldn't quite make out what he was trying to say because her thoughts were filled with erratic arguments with herself. She was trying to deny the words that her father had been telling her all this time. Finally, she had enough and instinctively took a big breath. And as soon as she felt the clean, fresh air in the mask, her head immediately cleared. It was as if she regained consciousness for the first time in a long time. She now held the mask all on her own and kept breathing it in. "Breath. What is this?" "Breathe. That's called an oxygen mask. The reason why you're feeling so dizzy inside this place is because it doesn't have enough oxygen. With that tank, you'll have no problem breathing again. It's okay to ask for help once in a while. It doesn't make you any less of the woman you are now." Reena didn't know what he was talking about, but the results were clear. She didn't feel like she'd pass out at any second anymore. She couldn't help but look at Michael in amazement. Not only was he a genius in the mystic arts that can control 4 elements at once, but he was also a genius in invention and innovation. He was even able to make such a life-changing machine with only a limited amount of materials. "This thing is really useful for people living in a higher altitude. I'll probably create a new product for them in the future so that they don't get oxygen deprived," he said, blurting out his ideas. "This is amazing. You're amazing," she muttered out. "Thanks. Now you can stay here while I go and find something out there." Reena immediately grabbed his arm. "What are you talking about? I want to come with you." Michael thought about going alone, but it wouldn't hurt to have a companion around to help him. "Are you sure? I think it's much safer here." But no matter what he said, she was determined. "I thought you didn't want to be my ally or my friend. What changed your mind? Do you think I'm cooler now?" he asked, joking. "What? And no." Reena began inhaling the oxygen mask at a faster pace. He began jumping through the different floating islands of the worm's stomach. Reena followed closely behind him, holding her wooden mask close to her mouth. Eventually, they reached a huge pile of trash, as big as a small mountain, in the worm's stomach. It was made out of slightly decomposed wood, soil, and other natural ingredients that the worm swallowed in its lifetime. There were also some few bits and pieces of armor, clothes, and weapons that the worm probably ingested a few years ago. Despite the large heap, Michael felt the call in his heart grow deeper as he looked at this mountain. "It's here." He quickly ran towards the heap and began rummaging through it. "What are you trying to find?" Reena asked him, and even though she didn't have to, she got her hands dirty and helped Michael search for whatever it was he was trying to search for. "It's close." He closed his eyes and let his body get a feel for the item's location. He let his own body move towards it, keeping himself in full concentration. Using magic, he moved thousands of kilograms of decomposing wood and soil. Still, the sheer size of the mound left a lot of places left to search. Eventually, he did find something. In the distance, he saw something peeking out of the soil. Its distinct white color made it easy to spot among the black and brown mulch that composed this small mountain. He quickly picked it up and dusted off the soil around it. It was an oval shape with a mouthpiece and several evenly spaced holes along its frame. He recognized it to be an ocarina. An instrument? That's what was calling me? But upon closer inspection, he realized that this wasn't just a simple instrument. It was a mithril relic. He didn't expect to see such a unique remnant of the past. Does this mean that the worm is thousands of years old? Of course, the ocarina could have also been left behind by a modern human just a few years ago. What does it do? His curiosity led him to gently blow on the mouthpiece. And although he knew he wasn't good at playing musical instruments, he still expected some kind of note to play when he blew on it. Instead, he just heard nothing. I guess it deteriorated, but it was at that moment that the whole worm started to tremble. Chapter 548. Ocarina. If the earthquakes induced by the colossal worm were bad, then the earthquakes inside the worm were even worse. Michael even almost lost his balance, which was quite a rare instance. What's happening? Reena panicked. The worm's moving. And just like he said, they felt a tremendous amount of force pushing them forwards, as if they were in a car that went from 0 kilometers per hour to 100 kilometers per hour in a few seconds. The acceleration caused him and everything else to be propelled backwards and up the worm's digestive tract. "Hold on," he said, grabbing Reena from midair and keeping her close. His absolute unity defense would protect them from any debris that, like them, were getting accelerated to a velocity equal to that of a high-speed train. Eventually, he saw a large opening in the distance, which was letting out a huge amount of light from the sun. He braced himself as the worm broke through to the surface and shot them out of its mouth, regurgitating all that it ate for the past few hours. Michael and Reena flew through the air, with the worm's stomach acid following them from behind. Now that he had access to an abundance of mana in the air, he quickly used his shadow teleportation skill to move him and Reena out of harm's way. A huge shadow enveloped both of them and transported them back into solid ground just as a huge piece of boulder shot out of the worm's mouth. Michael laid on the ground, with Reena on top of him and still clutching his clothes for safety. It's okay now." Reena opened her eyes and looked around, noticing that they were finally out of the worm and back over ground. "You did it!" She cheered and smiled at Michael, only to realize that she was still directly on top of him. Her face slowly turned tomato red down from her neck up to her forehead. She was heating up so much that her head was starting to smoke. And finally, as if all the pressure built up had exploded, Reena completely disappeared and reappeared directly behind a tree, still blushing. Michael stood up, wondering why she was acting so weird when there was plenty of oxygen in the air. "Grew." He heard a low-tone growl coming from the colossal worm itself. And if he was seeing it right, it was as if the worm was looking directly at him when it growled. A few seconds later, the worm turned around and submerged itself back below the surface. Was it because of the ocarina? He took out the ocarina mithril relic out of his pockets and observed it under normal light. When he played this, the worm suddenly got the urge to vomit them out. That wasn't a coincidence. However, he didn't see any kind of magic imbued in the instrument, so he found it hard to understand how it could have created that kind of a reaction from the worm. "I guess I'll keep this with me for now." He then turned to Reena, who looked like she had finally calmed herself down. "So, what do we do now?" Reena cleared her throat. "I think we should separate for now. I promise I won't try to fight you again. I'll just wait for my teammates to get the keys." Of course, one of the reasons why she wanted to separate from Michael was because she was afraid that she would start liking him more and more. That can't happen. After all, they were still competitors in this auction. "I guess it's goodbye then," Michael said to her. He didn't mind not being allies with Reena because that meant that he could use his drone freely. He felt much more at ease when he was using his drone vision and overlooking the entire map. That way, he could see everything with a third-person perspective. Also, he wanted to spy on the other players in the game. By now, there must have been some fights or altercations just like he had with Reena. He hoped that he would be able to get a glimpse of their ability and plan accordingly so that he'd be prepared when he fought with them. While he was thinking about all of this stuff, Reena slowly walked away from him. And although she was the one who suggested they separate from each other, she couldn't help but look back at Michael. Even now, she was hesitating whether she should just stick with him or keep on going by herself. On one hand, pairing up with Michael meant that they'd have a much better chance of winning the drops compared to others. She also thought that the only way that they could beat someone like Bo was if they teamed up on her. However, her own stubbornness led her to keep walking forwards and separating from Michael. Meanwhile, now that Michael was all alone, he sat down in a secluded corner of the forest and took out his drone once again. With a simple push, The container popped out and allowed him to put on the glasses for the drone vision. Once he put it on, he found himself piloting the drone itself. The propellers roared as he commanded it to move upwards, raising up to the very skies. Immediately, he scanned the area. He noticed that there were signs of fighting all around the map. There were huge patches of land where the forest had completely been balled. The lingering mana in the air allowed him to see the intensity at which they fought. This power could have only come from Bo, hailed as the strongest of the Rising Six. I missed it, he thought. He would have loved to see what kind of ability she had. He eventually set his sights onto another part of the map. This time, he was able to see two distinct light mana signatures facing off against each other. They're fighting. He moved his drone closer towards them, but still making sure that he was at an appropriate distance to where they couldn't hear his propellers. Once he was completely overhead, he finally saw their faces. One man was wearing a leather cowboy hat and all the swagger that came with it. The other one was wearing matching khaki pants and a shirt. If I can recall, the cowboy is called Reptar and he's from the Crocodile Leather Company. Then that means that the one opposite him is his supposed rival, Erlo's from the Alligator Company. Their postures were very tense, as if they were just waiting for one of them to move before all hell broke loose. He was even tempted to just shoot a unity gun at them to make them start fighting. It would be better for the two of them to take each other out because they were ranked 3rd and 4th in the Rising Six. But no matter how much Michael waited, the two kept standing still, as if waiting for the perfect moment. And then suddenly, both of them turned their heads at the same time. They were looking at someone in the distance. Michael panned his drone to look at what they were looking at. As it turned out, they were staring at none other than Reena herself, who had just stumbled onto their positions. Chapter 549. Reena's Realization. Meanwhile, looking from above, Barnaby pointed at the three-way standoff that was happening in the game. Look what we have here, folks. Reena has just stumbled upon the confrontation between Reptar and Erlo's. Now, we know from the history of their companies that they are long-standing rivals. Who will win? Will the crocodile prove himself to be the apex predator? Or will his nemesis alligator come out on top? Or maybe, we'll see the underdog win. Reena herself has proven to be quite capable when dealing with the other magnetics, given the versatility of her red dust. Reena, noticing that their stares were directed at herself, slowly walked out of the bushes and into the clearing. She had her hands up, indicating that she had no intention of interfering in whatever they were doing. I'm just passing by, she said. I don't want to interrupt your fight. She then slowly backed away from them, intending to go back the way she came. The two looked at her and smiled. Oh, you don't have to go away. You're not interrupting us, said Reptar, fixing his cowboy hat. In fact, we were just about to come look for you, Erlo said. It was at this point that Reena noticed that Erlo's khaki shorts and shirt were completely spotless. They weren't tattered from a brutal fight, nor was it stained with dirt or blood. It was speckless. This immediately came off as a red flag to her. She knew that whenever Reptar and Erlo's met each other, there would always be some sort of confrontation between them. They were rivals through and through. One would always try to best the other. But this time something was different. They weren't facing each other like enemies. They were facing her, as if she was their enemy. You're working together, she realized. Reptar stomped his foot on the ground, with the spurs on his cowboy boot making that rolling sound. Correctamundo. Reena defensively lowered her posture immediately. There was nothing good about the two rivals settling their conflict and working together. You know, Reena, we realize that we stand a better chance to win the Sudrops if we put all of our energy from fighting one another to fighting all the others, Erlo said, walking cautiously towards her, as if he was approaching a wild animal and trying not to spook it. You understand us, right? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, there's no way that we're ever going to defeat Bo by ourselves. Sometimes we need to team up. Reena had her hands behind her back, slowly reaching for her scimitars. The remaining speck of red dust in her body slowly gathered around her palms, ready to be used. Now you want to eliminate me, she said to them, scoffing. Reptar tipped his cowboy hat to her. No, no, not yet. We've known each other for way too long. We're planning to defeat that guy from Reborn. We're better off starting with the weakest first, no offense to him. Erlo's agreed. It's just the smartest move we can make. We don't have anything against the guy. We even commend him for how he had performed in the auction. But let's face it, this is a competition, not a friendly meeting. Someone has to be eliminated one way or the other. And we just don't want it to be us. Reena gritted her teeth. Knowing that they were targeting Michael, she tried not to look back in his direction. Then you should let me leave and I'll let you guys be, she lied. She was going to go back and warn Michael what they were planning. Come on, Reena. We know you met with the boy. We know you fought against him. That's the reason why we're even here in the first place, Erlo's admitted. Just tell us where he is, and you can go on your way. If she told them where he was, then she could hold on to the game for much longer. There could even be a chance for her teammate on the other side to find a key and allow her to take one of the drops in the glass dome. This was what she wanted. She told herself that she would do anything she could to get Spice Vice into the major factions. And the way to do that was to betray Michael. We didn't even say we're allies, so I won't be betraying him, she reasoned. But no matter what she tried to think, she couldn't bring herself to move. Just then, she remembered what Michael said to her in the worm's stomach. I'm doing this to make people feel comfortable. His words were like a bolt of lightning in her mind. What was she doing this for anyway? She only started working on her father's company because she treasured her late mother's memory of cooking with spices. Because of that, she wanted other people to feel as happy as she did when cooking with spices. That was the reason why she was doing this. She wasn't doing this because she wanted to become part of the major factions. She just wanted spices, her spices, to spread love and joy throughout the world. And with this breakthrough, Reena knew what she had to do. I'm sorry, but I can't let you do that. The two looked at her, surprised. They thought that she'd have no problem telling them Michael's location. That's fine, Erlo sighed. We'll just look for him ourselves. The two of them slowly walked in the direction from where she and Michael separated. And just as they walked past her, they suddenly stopped in their tracks. Are you serious? Reptar asked, grabbing his cowboy hat. You're really doing this? Erlos looked down at his legs and saw that a string of red dust was lassoed near his ankle, preventing him from moving. If he did, then he'd have to say goodbye to his feet. Reptar was in a similar situation, forcing both of them to stop. You could have played in the game for a little while longer if you had just gone on your way silently, Erlo said, taking out a whip from his waist and snapping it in the air. Reptar turned around and faced Reena. It's not usually my style to hit a lady, but this is a game. So, I'll have to ask for your forgiveness later, my lady. Immediately, a projection of a tremendous alligator head appeared above Reptar, its teeth bared and ready to chomp at anything. His mithril relic gauntlets glowed with a dark green energy as he used both of his hands and chomped down on the red dust string tied around his ankles. A projection of a crocodile's jaws coincided with his arms and bit down onto the string, which immediately broke off and dispersed into pure red dust. However, even those red dust were soon crushed into smithereens as Reptar's gauntlets went for another bite. Reena gritted her teeth. Her small collection of red dust had depleted even more. She should have known. He was in the 5th stage of body formation after all. She'd have trouble fighting against him if he was alone. But then she also had to worry about Erlos, who was in the peak 4th stage. But despite the obvious disparity in strength, Reena still held strong. She had to stop them from finding Michael. Chapter 550, Reena's Stubbornness. Meanwhile, the crowd were in uproar over the new developments in the game. Oh my God! The two rivals are working together. That's very unexpected, but it kinda makes sense. The only way that they can contend with Bo is if they fight her together. But I kind of feel sorry for Reena. She just survived from being swallowed by the colossal worm. And now, it looks like she's in even much deeper trouble. She's already used most of her energy fighting Michael. And now, she'll have to fight the number 3 and number 4 in the Rising 6. Everyone knew that she would lose immediately once they fought against each other, which was why the obvious action that Reena should take was to simply run away from them as fast as possible. With Reena's abilities, she'd find it easier than others to escape from this situation. That was what they thought was going to happen. But instead of running away, she instead insisted on fighting with the two of them for no apparent reason. What's she doing? She should run away now. Is she planning on fighting them? For what? Now that I think about it, Reptar and Erlo's obolites perfectly complement each other. Even Bo would have to be careful with it. Reena took out both of her scimitars and rushed towards the Erlos, the weakest of the two. She knew that she had a chance to triumph against them if she could defeat him first and deal with Reptar another time. She jumped in the air, twirling her body to create that signature spinning blade that would shred anything it touched. In response, Erlos raised his whip and swung it above his head. And as the whip hit Reena's spinning blades, something unexpected happened. Reena felt her momentum completely stop in the air. Surprised, she looked at her scimitar and saw that Erlo's whip had wrapped itself around its blades. With such a flimsy weapon, everyone would have thought that the whip would simply get shredded into a million pieces. However, that whip wasn't just a normal weapon. It was a mithril relic, and one that was powered by Erlo's ability. The skeletal jaws of a long-nosed alligator appeared on top of Erlo's head. This skeleton was much different from normal alligators as its teeth perfectly fit together, leaving behind no gaps nor holes when it was clamped together. Reena looked at her blades and saw that a miniature skeletal jaw had clamped itself on her scimitar. And no matter how much she tried to move her scimitar, it wouldn't budge at all. Just then, Erlos yanked the whip back towards him, carrying Reena and her scimitar blades with it. Reena prepared one of her blades, taking this as a chance to enter close quarters combat with Erlos. But it was at this moment that she realized that on the corner of her eyes, Reptar had quietly moved into place and was ready to intercept her. Reptar's two hands were openly positioned as if it was a crocodile's jaws just waiting to crush anything that came near it. She immediately aborted her plans and tried to cut off the whip that tied her weapon. Her blades clanged as it smashed into the leather whip. Just then, the skeletal alligator appeared and created a protective field around its whip itself, as if the whip was its own body. This was Erlo's ability. Nothing could escape his grasp as long as those skeletal alligator heads had attached itself to them. It didn't matter if she had the strongest and sharpest weapons in the world, she still wouldn't be able to get his grip off of anything. She continued to get pulled in closer and closer towards Reptar's jaws. If she got within his strike zone, then she'd find herself completely vulnerable. Finally, she gathered a little bit of her red dust and commanded them to coat the edge of one of her scimitar blades. With this addition, she sliced towards the whip again. This time, her three-headed diva woman imbued power into her weapon and fought against the power of the skeletal alligator. The two clashed, giving off an invisible shockwave, before the alligator found itself unable to hold on. It finally let go of her scimitar, slinking back into Erlo's whip handle. However, it was just a little too late as her momentum was forcing her to fall directly where Reptar's gauntlets were positioned. Having no choice, she braced herself and crossed her scimitars into a defensive position. As soon as she crossed the invisible threshold distance between her and Reptar, the gigantic crocodile diva's eyes lit up yellow before chomping down with such great intensity and force that it created a visible shockwave around her. This was Reptar's ability. Anything that came close enough to his strike zone would get crushed. It didn't matter if it was the most durable material in the world. They would still get crushed into a pancake. Reptar's gauntlets closed onto Reena, but not before using her two scimitars to block it from above and below. She gritted her teeth, feeling the immense amount of force that was put onto her scimitars. It was getting more and more powerful as she stayed under his jaws. Despite the force bearing down on her, she refused to give up. However, Reptar's crushing power was just too strong. Cracks resounded out of her scimitars as it started to fracture under the weight. Even her mithril relic weapons couldn't handle his power. Indignant, she used the rest of her remaining red dust to patch the cracks in her scimitars, hoping that it would give her more time to get out of this situation all on her own. However, even her red dust was starting to fail her. The jaws were starting to pulverize her dust into nothingness. Even her three-faced diva was starting to feel the pressure. She was starting to bend her neck, as if an imaginary crocodile had her by the head. Unable to hold on, Reena was forced to let go of her grip on her weapons and jump away into safety. Once they no longer had the protection of her three-faced diva, the scimitars became just like any other normal weapon in the world. Reptar closed his gauntlets onto the scimitars, crushing them into a million pieces, with its fragments turning into nothing but powder in the air. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," Reptar said, turning his gauntlets over and letting the powdered scimitar fall to the ground. "You should surrender now so you don't have to get hurt anymore," Erlo's advised. The two of them started walking away from her. Now that she had no mithril relic, she had no more access to her abilities. However, before they could even take another step back, they felt Reena rushing towards them with a sharp rock she found on the ground. "Why are you being so stubborn? Is it because of that boy? Why are you protecting him?" She didn't respond and just rushed towards them with crazy eyes. "I don't want to do this, but if you continue to pester us, then I'll have no choice but to completely knock you unconscious." Reptar raised his hands and conjured the crocodile jaws into his arms. And in this vulnerable moment, Reena couldn't help but utter out, "Help!"